Chapter 424. The question came so suddenly that Mathers was stunned for a moment. Unbelievable. Orton? Realization dawned on him. No, it's Lord of the Flies. Looks like you've achieved something, and it seems like you found a new contractor. I'm so happy for you. Shut up. Beelzebub interrupted him angrily, as if he was hurt by the reality in front of him. Have you really fallen into the abyss? Isn't it just like what you see? Mathers spread his arms and asked curiously, Is there anything unbelievable about this? Or did I accidentally leave a wrong impression of you? Silence. In a long silence, Huaishur felt the steel book in his hand trembling slightly. That bastard Orton, that idiot, he didn't want to believe everything he saw until the end, Beelzebub whispered. Beelzebub murmured softly. Only before he died, he cried like a dead child. Until the end, he believed that you wouldn't betray him. He believed that you, whom he saw as his elder brothers, wouldn't leave him. Mathers, how dare you? The book of steel trembled violently, as though something was struggling to fly out from the pages. It questioned in grief and indignation without regard for anything else. How dare you? Mathers didn't answer. He just remained silent. After a long, long time, he looked down helplessly and sighed softly. Orton was still too weak. He sighed with pity. He's always been like this. He always makes people sad, just like a child. He'd rather wait for death with his sweet dreams than face the truth. Face your mother's leg. Beelzebub scolded. You idiots still have the face to claim that you're righteous. Of course we'll claim it. Or rather, we think that we're the righteous ones. Without any shame, Mathers nodded calmly, ignoring Beelzebub's insults. He waited quietly for Beelzebub to finish scolding him before slowly saying, It's rare for old friends to meet again. Lord of the Flies, whether you believe it or not, I'm happy right now. No, I should be excited. Therefore, even if you're already on my opposite side, I still have to ask. He reached out to the Book of Steel and asked sincerely, Do you want to come to our side? You can witness all of this on behalf of Orton. Mathers, let me tell you, you old bastard, I will only witness one thing in my life. Beelzebub said coldly, That's how you idiots drown in a cesspool and your whole family explodes. Otherwise, don't even think about it. Do as you wish. Mathers calmly looked at Huaishur, who had completely turned into the background. What about you, Mr. Huaishur? Even in the abyss, I've heard a lot about you. I have to say that your performance was extremely dazzling and even admirable. A person like you shouldn't be reduced to a tool for the Astronomy Society. Do you want to come? He said, Golden Dawn needs new blood like you. In silence, Huaishur tilted his neck and raised his right hand that had just healed slightly. With trembling claws, he lit a cigarette for himself. After taking 2 deep puffs and showing off in front of this old bastard, he slowly exhaled a puff of smoke. What? Golden Dawn is also recruiting male prostitutes? A very creative rejection. Unfortunately, nothing can change. Mathers shrugged slightly. He didn't care about this rejection. He didn't even kill them. He just looked down at them with pity. Even Huaishur, who was prepared to sacrifice himself, was stunned. Looking at the time, it's about time. The elegant middle-aged gentleman lowered his head and glanced at the time on his watch. No matter how useless those tools of the Iron Legion are, they should have made the Queen of Rotten Dreams realize the existence of the enemy. Right? They were inside the double helix, isolated from the outside world. Using the Abyss bloodline as the foundation, the creator Mathers had created a new framework of hell that completely enveloped the Stellaris, just like the Abyss vesicle. In essence, this place could already be called a sealed hell. Here, without the support of the Rainbow Bridge's origin substances or the support of those miraculous engravings, the Iron Legion was nothing more than an undead army. Even if they couldn't be killed, what was the point? Even if they used all their strength, they wouldn't be able to cause any harm to the dying ruler. Instead, they would only make her flustered and exasperated. She would be completely infuriated by the flies in front of her, and then her appetite would increase. As he spoke, a shrill cry suddenly sounded off in the distance. The shrill cry seemed to be tangible, scratching at the deck and the ground. It ravaged everyone's eardrums, tugging at their consciousness and souls. It wanted to drag everyone into the abyss with it. Amidst the Iron Legion's attacks, the Queen of Rotten Dreams' silhouette suddenly trembled. Immediately afterwards, she began to rapidly expand. It was as if a balloon was being blown up. Within her formless body, endless darkness began to rapidly multiply and expand until finally, the last shackles on her body were completely torn apart. Rotten Dreams surged out like a flood. It rose into the sky, then fell from the sky, spreading in all directions. However, it also seemed as if everything was rapidly falling into that pitch-black abyss. It was being pulled into an eternal rotten nightmare. The nightmare had descended. Just like a greedy monster, it swallowed the entire Stellaris into its stomach inch by inch. Amidst the violent tremors, the tottering lights were quickly extinguished. Darkness had arrived. That ruler really doesn't have any patience. Mathers sneered softly. Didn't she start to fly into a rage after just a little fiddling? That saved me the trouble of going over. The nightmare was like a black tide, howling from the top floor. Countless pitch-black liquids spewed out from the cracks in the ceiling, gradually drowning out the entire corridor. Everything was falling into an eternal rotten dream. In Mather's hand, the staff turned into a black umbrella. It opened up, blocking out the obstructions. At the last moment, he turned around and glanced behind him. He didn't look a sure. Instead, he looked at Beelzebub's cover. "There's one last thing I want to tell you. Lord of the Flies," he said calmly. "We tried to save him. We tried more than once, but he refused." Mathers told him. "It wasn't us who abandoned Orton. It was Orton who abandoned us." The black umbrella turned slightly and disappeared into the darkness with him. It cruelly left them behind, allowing them to be swallowed by the abyss nightmare. There was nowhere to run. After a long silence, Beelzebub sighed softly in Huaisher's consciousness. "I'm sorry, big brother. I seem to have ruined your great opportunity to jump ship." "Huh? Wasn't it to cover for me?" Huaisher shook his head. "Jumping ship is the funny part. Would anyone give up their job as an inspector to become a fugitive? Moreover, if he brought the Book of Destiny to the enemy, wouldn't he be a traitor among traitors?" That wasn't how Russian dolls were played. He leaned against the deck tiredly and found a more comfortable position for himself. He was waiting for death. "I thought you'd be curious about other things." "I'm curious about too many things, Beelzebub." Huaisher shook his head nonchalantly. "Your little secret has to wait a bit." "Huh. You really don't have any experience in using tools. Have you really treated yourself as a tool before? Haven't I always existed as a tool?" Beelzebub answered coldly. "It would be great if I could always be a tool, Huaisher. I wanted to return to my original self countless times. I carried out missions without knowing anything, consumed myself peacefully, and welcomed destruction. That way, there wouldn't be too many unrealistic expectations placed on me, and no one would sacrifice themselves for me. I wouldn't feel sad either." "Sound good." Huaisher thought for a while. Ignoring the dark mud that reached his chest, he asked seriously, "But have you really never felt a trace of happiness, Beelzebub? After being given a will, did it only bring you pain?" The Book of Steel was silent for a while and then laughed hoarsely. It didn't answer his question. Instead, it sighed from the bottom of its heart. "Although the time was short, it was really nice to work with you." Huaisher shrugged. "I want to say the same to you, but I'm really pissed off by you." "Then there's nothing I can do. My programs were all set by Orton. That guy's already dead. You can't beat him up." Amidst the countless threads of black nightmares, Beelzebub laughed in the end. "Good night, Huaisher. I'll leave first." "Okay, good night." Huaisher nodded. The black mud quickly rose and covered his neck. He couldn't feel Beelzebub's voice. He tried hard to raise his head, trying to float his face above the rising black mud. However, the solidified nightmares kept pouring into his mouth and nose, tugging at his soul. In the end, he took a deep breath. Then, the light from the cigarette at the corner of his mouth went out in the darkness. The nightmare came again. At the last moment, he seemed to have hallucinated. It was as though there was something on his saddlebag that was glowing. He closed his eyes. The abyss rushed toward him. The endless fall began. There was no need to struggle at all. There was also no possibility of escaping. The moment he was entangled by the mud-like nightmares, it was like being swallowed into the stomach of the queen of rotten dreams. There was no chance of survival. Endless darkness and pain poured into Huaishi's soul. The fear of death, the pain of growth, the hesitation of aging, and the numbness of illness. It was like a black torrent was swallowing him. However, there was no torture or uneasiness as he expected. Instead, it seemed quite good. He had fallen into a cesspool, but he didn't feel suffocated. Instead, he found himself a cesspool overlord. This strange experience made Huaishi feel that something was wrong. However, not long after, he was completely pulled into the deepest level of the rotten dream. He fell into the hell dream of the Stellaris. He fell to the ground. The barren land, the gray sky, and no pleasant colors could be seen. There was only the wind of withering and the flesh tentacles on the dry ground that were constantly expanding and extending like veins. The endless torture had only just begun. But before that, around him, countless walking corpses who had been lost in the rotten dream turned their heads and looked at Huaishi ferociously. In the darkness, Mirando's ferocious face slowly emerged. He grinned at Huaishi. What a coincidence. He stared at Huaishi's face with resentment. We meet again. Huaishi subconsciously took a step back and wanted to pull out his weapon, but he found that he couldn't find his equipment here. He could only hope. He raised his hand and said seriously, "Sorry, I'm sorry. You might have mistaken me for someone else. I actually have a twin brother who looks similar to me, but he's despicable and morally corrupt. He must have offended you." As he spoke, he looked left and right, trying to find a way to escape. But he found that the surroundings had long been sealed off by the walking corpses. There was no way to escape. "Ha, are you afraid?" "Ha ha." Mirando laughed mockingly, stirring up the darkness and pressing forward step by step. "Don't worry, I said I would tear you into pieces, but I've changed my mind now. After all, here, it's hard for you to die, even if you want to." In an instant, dozens of hands of darkness whizzed over, penetrating Huaishi, tearing him apart and lifting him into the air. Blood splashed on the ground, and countless flowers of flesh and blood quickly grew. "How do you feel, little brat?" Mirando grinned and suddenly tore off his arms. "Don't be so scared that you'll pee. We haven't started yet." In the dizziness of the severe pain, Huaishi once again saw on his pants the key ring that AI Ching gave him seemed to be glowing. Under the illumination of the light, he quickly fell into a trance. For a moment, he lost the perception of his limbs. But soon, he discovered that his limbs were gradually mutating and expanding. Countless sharp bones rapidly pierced out of the broken shell of his body. The severe pain of the growth of his skull made him unable to help but growl in a low voice. In the darkness, a huge figure was rapidly expanding, enlarging, and enlarging again. It spread out a pair of wings that covered the sky and the sun, shattering the dark clouds that filled the sky. Then, with a deep breath, an iron-green tyrannical fire spurted out from its mouth and nose. A halo that looked like a sun slowly rose behind him. The solemn hymn was played again. "Holy, holy, holy." Tens of millions of people roared in unison. Countless souls were pulled by the halo from afar, merging into the solemn back of light with ferocious edges and corners. And under the illumination of the solemn holy light, the dragon of the end of the world, Bahamut, slowly lowered his huge head that was like a mountain, and his eyes that were comparable to the sun and the moon drooped. Looking at Mirando's dull face, he smiled happily. "Little brother, you remember you just said, it's hard to die even if you want to, right?" He did not wait for Mirando's answer. Huaishi skillfully raised one of his front claws, spat out a mouthful of iron spit, and rubbed it. Amidst the resounding roar of the friction between steel and iron, he brazenly smashed it toward the ground in front of him. And so a level 10 hurricane that was enough to destroy a city spread out in all directions. The earth shook with a loud bang. Countless lava spewed out from the earth's crust. As Bahamut spread out his wings, he announced the arrival of destruction to the dream of the abyss. In reality, I suffered humiliation. In the dream, I punched out heavily. Chapter 425. First, it was a punch, then another punch. The dust that blotted out the sky, and the sun rose in the hurricane. Bahamut grinned and grinned happily. He raised his claws, and in an instant, countless steel multiplied from the sharp scales. Triple drummer, thunderbolt. As the punch landed, the ground within a radius of 10,000 miles sank down instantly. Countless tentacles of flesh and blood that were hiding underground were blown up by this simple punch. Then he closed his claws, clasped his 8 fingers, and aimed at the wailing and squirming darkness below like a volleyball. Triple thunderbolt, collapse of the sky. Underground fire burst out, and thousands of miles of lava turned into a rainstorm that rushed into the sky and then fell from the sky. This was a trick that she had secretly learned from Luo Xian. With Huaishi's unreasonably large body, she was finally able to use it. Even though she was not even at the beginner level, her explosive power was still several times stronger than before. It was just like a falling star. When Huaishi slowly moved his claws away, the scales on his palms had already cracked, and the darkness under his palms had disappeared without a trace. The state of Dracula, the imprint of the miracle, was directly shattered by this crisp punch. Not only did it fall back out, there was only a pool of squirming blood left in the lava and iron mud pit. It closed up with difficulty, turning into a broken body like a rag doll. Just like what Mirando said, no one would die here. Huaishi's smile became more and more cheerful. He raised the tip of his claw and pinched Mirando's head as if he was pinching a speck of dust. Then the broken body swayed in the wind. Blood dripped to the ground. Huaishi asked curiously, "How do you feel, little brother?" Mirando looked at him blankly, and his distorted face was numb. It was as if his soul had been swallowed by a nightmare. This was indeed a nightmare, but it was not a nightmare that swallowed his soul, but Huaishi in front of him. His smile. "Remember not to pee out." Huaishi exhaled a wisp of metal steam from his mouth and nose. "We have just begun." Mirando opened his mouth and wanted to make sound. It was unknown whether it was a wail or a plea for mercy. But that didn't matter anymore. Huaishi took a deep breath. As a result, those insignificant moans were completely drowned out by the roar of the exhalation. Tyrannical flames soared into the sky. Purgatory's pain had only just begun. In fact, it didn't last long before it stopped. One of the less important reasons was that his mouth was a little dry after vomiting for 5 minutes, and he didn't have enough saliva. Another important reason was that there were guests. It wasn't accurate to say that he was a guest. It should be said that they were the natives of the Rotten Dream. Accompanied by an earth-shaking boom, an enormous creature with 3 black goat hooves and wriggling tentacles slowly walked over from the end of the desolate plain. Several huge mouths opened at the same time, letting out sharp screeches at Huaishi. On its body, countless deformed monsters spread their wings and soared into the sky. They turned into a black cloud and rushed towards Huaishi like a swarm of locusts. And in the eternally gloomy sky, a huge ferocious shadow appeared. He didn't know if it was a devil ray or something else. It was like an oval blanket full of eyes and tentacles of flesh and blood. It stretched its body in the dark dream of hell, wriggling as it flew. Wherever it passed, a sticky and stinky rain of blood would be spilled. Its speed seemed slow, but was actually fast. In an instant, it was within 100 miles. What made Huaishi even more horrified were the countless rotting souls that were slowly crawling out of the cracked earth. These pale, translucent figures were covered in deformed marks, and they constantly let out chaotic screams and wails. When they collided with each other, they stuck together and crawled on the ground like earthworms or staggered as they walked. Countless faces filled with pain and hatred looked up and stared at Huaishi. They raised their hands and wanted to pull him into the darkness of the Rotten Dream. It was the residue left after the Rotten Dream digested countless times. Those victims would sooner or later become like this after falling into a nightmare that they couldn't wake up from. Eternal torture and pain, with no release. When the countless rotten souls stuck together, they became worm-like things. They constantly split out tentacles and wanted to entangle Bahamut's body. And at the end of the sky, a huge shadow appeared. One could vaguely make out the outline of a human. However, they had three completely different faces: a woman with a hideous grin, a child in pain, and a charred ghost face. Their 5 hands were holding various instruments of torture, dripping with blood, and they were looking hungrily at Huaishur. It seemed to be thinking about how to entertain this guest. It made Huaishur feel a strong sense of danger. "This is your reinforcements." He lowered his head and looked at the remains of Mirando between his fingernails. He asked curiously, "Aren't you going to introduce them? You're dead, kid. The predators in the Rotten Dream have been alerted by you." He, black. Mirando's single eye that was slowly healing was full of mockery and venom. "Even if I don't know what you are, you'll definitely fall into a situation 1,000 times worse than mine. In this hell where you can't die, even if you want to, you'll pray that the day the world ends will come soon." Crack. Huaishur's fingers accidentally used a little strength and broke his waist. Then molten iron dripped down and covered his hideous face, causing his hideous expression to become sluggish. "Although I don't know what will happen to me, I don't think they'll have the time to care about you." Huaishur's movements were swift. He carefully stabbed a small sacrificial knife into his body, fixing him firmly in the gradually solidifying iron. Then he pasted layers of rapidly solidifying iron on the outside, quickly kneading it into a round iron egg. "You'd better pray that I can win later and remember to come back to you. Otherwise," before the last iron plate was covered, Huaishur grinned and smiled at him. "Otherwise, you'll stay here alone for the rest of your life." Bang! In Mirando's scream, the 2 iron plates were welded together. In the end, Huaishur threw him under his feet. After 2 more stomps, he disappeared without a trace. It seemed that this coffin was very successful. He really hoped that the person who used it would give him a good review. Next, Bahamut slowly raised his mountainous head and looked at the enemies around him. He grinned happily. "Let's begin." Before his voice died away, his wings suddenly spread out. The wings that covered the sky set off a frenzied hurricane, pulling his body into the sky. Then he smashed down again like a falling star. Pulling the blood-colored devil ray that looked like a carpet, it landed in the deep pit. He raised his foot and stepped down. "Use steps." His foot stepped right on the roots of its 3 tails that were entangled with flesh and blood, almost completely flattening them. A high-pitched and shrill scream spread out. The carpet-like monster made of twisted flesh and blood quickly twitched. Blood spurted out. Then it suddenly raised its body and opened several huge mouth parts in its open abdomen. Thick tentacles stretched out from them and wrapped around Huaishur's body. Then it frantically extracted Bahamut's blood. The premise was that the sharp suction cups on its mouth parts could break through the scales on Huaishur's body and the tempered skin that was comparable to armor below. Naturally, it was useless. Huaishur directly raised his claws, grabbed a tentacle, and then pulled it out with a hiss. He wanted to see how long this unlucky thing's tongue could stretch out. In fact, it was quite long. Huaishur pulled out for several kilometers and still had not finished. It seemed that he could continue to pull, but he had lost his patience. He irritably tore off the carpet of flesh and blood on his body, then violently pulled the tongue and tied it into a thick bundle. It was almost impossible to tie it up. It was too thick. Huaishur raised his foot and stomped down twice. Finally, he squeezed out enough space. He suddenly pulled in the flesh and blood tentacles, and then quickly tied a dead knot. This time, it looked much more pleasing to the eye. It was just a carpet that looked like a murder scene that was constantly dripping blood. Ignoring the black, cloud-like locusts that wrapped around him, Huaishur directly pulled out the hammer of pain and aimed at the carpet that was firmly under his feet. He swung it up. 80. The hammer of pain roared excitedly, frantically extracting the pain that was everywhere in this hell. The flames behind it spewed out hundreds of meters high. When it whistled and smashed down, it glowed with a flaming flame that was jaw-dropping. Boom! The earth shook violently, and a hurricane swept through. The carpet demon let out a ghost scream. Huaisher smashed it again, and it screamed again. It was as if there was a large, screaming chicken tied up in the middle. Soon, the screams disappeared, and it turned into a pile of mud that could not die. Huaisher took a deep breath. The melted metal steam turned into a tsunami and flew out with a roar, burning a river of lava that was hundreds of miles long on the ground. Under the terrifying high heat, the bloody pounder burned with a wail. It was quite good. Huaisher raised his claws and wiped the non-existent sweat on his forehead. He felt that the surroundings were much brighter. Then he saw the other monsters in the distance who were stunned in place. He looked at him with his mouth agape. Then he looked at the burning flesh under his feet. Then he looked at him again. It was as if he could not understand what had happened. Why was the ghost from the outside more ferocious than him? Soon, countless wriggling ghosts suddenly trembled, turned around swiftly, and quickly disintegrated. They began to turn into scattered leucoplakia, burrowing into the soil and disappearing. They ran away, but the three-legged tentacle monster was one step slower. It did not have the talent of its companion when it came to running. After all, the target was too big. Just as it moved its body, it sensed the cold eyes of the three-faced monster looking at it. It stopped awkwardly and shivered. It turned back to look at Huaisher. It was ready to muster its courage and charge, then saw the huge dragon of the end slowly stretch its body. As if it had finished warming up, its body began to expand again. It frantically extracted the abyss sediment here, the essence of pain in the rotten dream, and the dragon of the end, which announced the destruction of all things, roared. In the roar, a loud noise burst out from Huaisher's body. It was the thunder that burst out when the bones grew and rubbed against each other. Accompanied by the booming beating of the heart, the burning blood turned into a tide, reverberating in this rapidly expanding body, filling in his palm. The originally burning carpet monster was quietly decomposed by the thunder and flames, turning into flying ashes. The power that had been accumulated in the nightmare for thousands of years was all swallowed by Bahamut, turning into new blood, bones, flesh, and scales, completely becoming a part of his body. Doubled, then doubled, and doubled again. It wasn't until the earth that bore it wailed that the unreasonable growth rate slowly came to a stop. In the dead silence, he lowered his head and looked at the two dull predators in front of him. He grinned. He found that he could grow and be happy again. Chapter 426. The moment the Queen of Rotten Dreams lifted the shackles and completely swallowed the Stellaris, a great uproar was set off on the endless sea. Through the double helix cage, everyone could see the viscous nightmare gushing out of the Stellaris like a waterfall. It was the essence of a nightmare that Rotten Dreams had collected and selected for hundreds of years in the abyss. It was the essence of despair left behind after countless souls were burned up in hesitation, pain, confusion, and destruction. It was a part of his body. Every part was an extension of the current him, the current Rotten Dreams. In the blink of an eye, it swallowed 110,000 passengers. The black nightmare rapidly expanded and evaporated. Gray fog rose and completely covered the outline of the Stellaris. It filled every corner of the double helix. It looked like a crystal ball imprisoned in a strange birdcage. Then it stood still. Not only did it not choose to tear apart the outer shackles, but it also seemed to not care about what was happening outside. It sealed itself and shrank all the remaining power in one place. The dark fog quickly solidified. It was like internal organs. Countless blood vessels and the outline and color of eyes emerged from it. The bone-deep resentment spread from the deranged eyes as he stared indifferently at the combatants outside the cage. For some reason, it was so terrifying, but it always reminded people of the dying prisoners in the ICU. They had no strength to resist, and they were powerless to resist the fall of destruction. They could only stare at the beautiful world outside the window with resentment and unwillingness. They cursed all of this, but soon, the frozen nightmare began to squirm crazily. A shrill cry burst out again. It was so ear-piercing. It was like indigestion. Something was moving crazily in his stomach. It was acting recklessly and was about to burst out of his stomach. What is that? Under the double helix crystal, Mathers stared at the surging nightmare. Then he suddenly raised his head and looked at the projection of Jaeger in the distance. Is it the backup plan of the Astronomy Society? Maybe, Jaeger replied. He neither smiled nor mocked. He just calmly told him, when facing an enemy, you always have to be prepared, don't you think? As expected of the preacher. He is more difficult to deal with than the rumors. Mathers nodded approvingly. Apart from this situation, you must have other preparations, right? But in fact, it doesn't matter at all. His life and death are of no importance to us. He glanced disdainfully at the twitching nightmare under his feet, as if it was not the ruler of the abyss but a piece of dead pork. Anyway, it's just bait in the trap. What's the big deal with one less or one more, right? Accompanied by his words, the endless sea beneath the twin spiraling mystic instruments suddenly froze. That power did not come from him. Rather, it would be more accurate to say that it was the embodiment of a certain authority, a certain law that was inscribed in the abyss. A power that could not be defied had descended upon this place. In the blink of an eye, all the raging waves calmed down. The sea surface was as smooth as a mirror. That's right. At this moment, the endless ocean had become a huge mirror that indifferently reflected the countless twin spiral pillars, the sky that represented the endless abyss, and the behemoths that were constantly fighting in the deep space. Inexplicably, there was an indescribable understanding that arose in everyone's hearts. The mirror of the ocean should be under their feet, but why did it feel like there was something overlooking them from inside? Immediately after, in the gloomy mirror, a twisted and cold shadow slowly emerged. It was as if it was floating up from the deep sea. The mirror realm, that should be the authority of the queen of rotten dreams. But at this moment, rotten dreams was still imprisoned by the twin spiraling secret instruments. So, who was the shadow that gradually emerged from the distant hell when the mirror realm was opened? What was that saying again? Mathers took off his hat, revealing a head of mottled white hair, as if he was welcoming the arrival of an important person. He smiled happily. Didn't some novels like to write a long time ago that when the stars returned to their positions, there would be a supreme being rising from the sea? Now, the constellation has indeed arrived at the correct position. Along with his words, in the mirror of the ocean, the gloomy and ferocious shadow was getting closer and closer. Endless gray and black had already covered everything as far as the eye could see. Something was coming, something was breaking out of the sea. In the roar, it was as if thousands of sharp reefs were rapidly rising from the bottom of the sea. Streaks of gray color pierced out from the mirror realm. After breaking through the shackles of depth, they revealed their ferocious appearance from the surface of the world. That was a tree. In the reflection of the mirror, the image of a withered and huge inverted tree was revealed. Countless complicated and sharp branches spread out in all directions, but there was not a single leaf or fruit on them. Only countless cries that sounded like a baby's cry echoed between the branches. It was like an invisible worm crawling, drilling into everyone's eardrums, gently pulling at their souls and wills, ravaging their organs and bones, pouring into their brains. It was not language, but it was undoubtedly the most straightforward way of expressing it. Any parent who heard such cries would immediately come to a realization. He said, "I'm hungry." Thus, in the twin spiraling secret instruments, the frozen nightmare also struggled violently, trembling, and letting out a shrill roar. But it was unable to break through the cage in front of it. It was unable to escape from the train that had spent so much effort to climb up. And then, in the mirror realm, the huge roots of the inverted tree seemed to be alive. They extended out from the mirror and gently and deftly entangled themselves on the twin, spiraling secret instruments. It directly penetrated into it. The tight seal of the twin, spiraling secret instruments was like an illusion at this moment. Of course, it did not exist. Only countless roots were like pairs of baby hands, hugging the nightmare and beginning to suck sweetly. "It's time to breastfeed, mother," When the last predator was burned to ashes by Bahamut's flames, Huaisher's body had swelled to an unimaginable extent. It felt like a walking continental plate, but there was nothing in the nightmare that could be used as a comparison. But when he looked around, there were no more enemies. The nightmare was barren and dead silent. A familiar voice sounded in the wind. "You seem to be having fun." He looked back in shock, but he could not see anything. At his feet, the tiny shadow raised its hand and waved, indicating that it was here. He lowered his head and lay on the ground, trying his best to move his eyes closer to the figure. Then, he became more and more shocked. "Huh, you're Beelzebub?" "That's me." Beelzebub tilted his head and looked at him. "I didn't expect you to recognize me. After all, your voice is similar to what I imagined. It sounds very frivolous and unreliable." He sighed with emotion. "But your appearance is also, it doesn't match at all." Huaisher originally thought that Beelzebub would look like a fat otaku from a newspaper office after transforming. But right in front of him, the blond young man smiled brightly, reminding him of sunshine. He was wearing a black motorcycle jacket and jeans, with thick leather boots on his feet. He seemed to have just returned from racing somewhere. His blue eyes were always filled with joy. Perhaps it was an illusion or something. Huaisher felt that he was different from before. It was not just his appearance. "Don't look like you're in disbelief, okay?" Beelzebub shrugged slightly. "This is a setting left by Orton. That bastard always likes to pinch himself when he pinches people. He doesn't care if others can accept it." "But why are you here?" Huaisher asked. "I'm the one who should be here, right?" Beelzebub shook his head. "I've always been an astral stream. Now that astral has been swallowed by the rotten dream, isn't it normal for me to appear here?" "Just you." Huaisher looked around nervously. Where did the others go? Then he realized that Beelzebub was looking at him strangely. It was as if he was the only unlucky person in the entire company who had not been added into the company's QQ account. Beelzebub's face was filled with sympathy, pity, helplessness, and a look that said, "Learn to be strong." This made him feel even more uneasy. Soon, the Book of Steel appeared in Beelzebub's hand. He opened it and scanned it with the radar, producing a projection. In the deepest part of the rotten dream, there was a bubble floating in the endless darkness. Like a soap bubble, it flowed with dazzling colors. It looked fragile, but no matter how the rotten dream eroded it, it could not penetrate it. Instead, it maintained its own independence and formed a new layer of dream in the nightmare. "What's this?" Huaisher asked. "A new type of matryoshka doll?" "Something like that," Beelzebub explained. "After all, the rotten dream has been rampant for so long. It's not strange for the astronomy department to have a dream protection technology that specifically targets it. Now, everyone's dreams have been integrated together. Under the protection of this law, the wills of those ordinary people have gathered together and are not contaminated by the abyss. Instead, under the strong external pressure, they've been integrated into a temporary soul to temporarily resist the erosion of the rotten dream. I have to say, the creativity is amazing." Huaisher's dog head was dazed. After a long time, he finally reacted. "Isn't I the only one who was thrown in here?" He angrily hammered the ground. "You're isolating me again. This is such a good thing. Why can't you bring me along?" Beelzebub sympathetically raised his hand and patted his paw tip. "If I'm not wrong, you were sent here to cause trouble, right? Well, after all, you look like you're good at tearing down houses. Let me see." In his hand, a blue ripple spread out from the Book of Steel, silently sweeping across Huaisher's body. Then, the radar began to analyze. "Oh, this recording technology is really exquisite. It seems to have been reorganized and modified. Looking at the labels and notes left behind, it was actually modified by the 6 creators to ensure that it can be reproduced in the rotten dream." Beelzebub sighed. "So, this is what you look like?" "I really couldn't tell." It's a long story, don't worry. Take your time." Beelzebub calmly waved his hand. "Anyway, we still have a long time before the rotten dream dies." "Wait, it's going to die?" "Yeah." Beelzebub spread his hands and looked around. "Isn't it already eaten until it's like an empty shell? If it was at its peak, You and I would have already become the nightmare's puppets, right? Who wants to kill it? Fleischer could not figure it out. No, who can kill it? Is it the rancher? If it was that guy, he was heartless and did not want to pay after the deed was done. Instead, he wanted to kill his cheap friend. This could be explained from the motive and ability. I'm not sure about that. In Beelzebub's hand, the Book of Steel showed a projection of the outside world, depicting a huge upside-down tree. It was solemn and terrifying. However, in the radar's observation, although it has some of the rancher's genealogical characteristics, it's more like a rotten dream in essence. Following Beelzebub's words, a bolt of lightning seemed to flash across Fleischer's blank thoughts. It was fleeting, but it connected all the original clues. That's its child, Fleischer murmured in realization. That's the surviving evil that it and the rancher gave birth to. Pain, begging for votes at the beginning of the month. Chapter 427. 91 years ago, in the midst of a great calamity, the rancher and the Queen of Rotten Dreams, who were seeking to expand their influence, came to an agreement and formed an eternal alliance. The guarantee of the alliance was the child they gave birth to 16 years after they had intercourse in the bewilderment realm. Strictly speaking, the Queen of Rotten Dreams had gotten the better end of the deal. After all, she held authority over both the mirror realm and the dream realm. Even a terrifying existence like the rancher would need her help sometimes. It was just like a young man who had a good opportunity, but no capital, throwing himself into the arms of a rich woman. He turned off the lights, closed his eyes, and worked for the whole night. After sacrificing his dignity, which was not worth mentioning, to bring happiness to everyone, he carried the money and left. Thinking of this, Fleischer suddenly realized something. From a certain perspective, the rancher could be considered his senior. He hurriedly cut off this train of thought. I can't think about it anymore. In any case, after the ranch master and decaying dream had established the eternal alliance, the right to travel through the mirror world was open to the pastors of paradise and the pure people. This allowed the ranch master to exert his influence everywhere in the mirror world. This was a wonderful move. From then on, he became the existence that had the most profound influence on the abyss. According to the Astronomical Society's conservative assessment, in just the past 90 years, he had obtained a 16% distortion in the present realm. The law of the jungle prevailed in the civilized world and was even regarded as a standard by some idiots. They didn't know that when they saw others as food, their lives, property, and even souls were gradually becoming food for others. The rancher had paid a great price for such a bountiful harvest. The important thing was the child he had with the rotten dreams. If it was just a simple sacrifice of a few chromosomes, it would only cost 50 or 60 RMB for nutrition. He wouldn't feel any heartache no matter how many children he had. Who knew? He might even eat them as snacks when he was bored. But the rotten dream's ambition was too great. Otherwise, apart from this one and only child, all of his other children wouldn't have died, and most of them would have died. He didn't know what kind of price the rancher had paid, but that child was already destined to become one of the future rulers of the abyss before he even opened his eyes. But if it was just a ruler, it wouldn't have caused such a fuss. The key was that before he was born, he had already become a surviving evil. In the public information of the Astronomical Association, there were only a few sentences that mentioned relevant information. Most people would probably think that this was some powerful title in the abyss, but in fact it was far more than that. Fleischer had heard about its nature from Crow. This title referred to the terrifying existence, even in the cradle of monsters in hell, the remnants of the old world. It was the crystallization of calamity that required an entire world to welcome destruction, fall, and turn into hell. After falling into the deepest depths, it would be born from the deepest and most chaotic abyss. It was a coincidence from the deepest part of hell, a pure and malicious joke. The moment he was born, he became the last survivor of the old world. Once, the fate of the entire world was entrusted to him. Just his existence alone was equivalent to the fate of the entire world, and the depth of hell was meaningless to him. The entire abyss would be his paradise. The moment they were born, They were gifted with almost unlimited growth potential. If left alone, it might even grow into a destructive elemental element. His existence was a huge threat to the present realm. The Queen of Rotten Dreams had racked her brains to give birth to such a terrifying monster. But no one expected that he would be the first to suffer the consequences of his own actions. And this day had actually come so quickly. 90 years might be a long life for humans, but for existences in hell, it might be just the blink of an eye. It wouldn't even be a single developmental cycle. In just 90 years, he had already forced Rotten Dreams to such an extent. In order to survive, he didn't hesitate to give up the authority of the mirror realm and escape pathetically. He was heavily injured. Even now, he was being chased by a child who still hadn't had his fill. The child has grown up and reached the rebellious stage. Isn't that normal? After hearing the whole story from Huai Shi, Beelzebub's reaction was rather calm. It was as if this was how it should be. He was extremely calm. In hell, there's no lifespan limit like in the present realm. For existences like rulers, they're practically immortal. Children are meaningless to them. Why do you think Rotten Dreams desires children so much? There was no such thing as maternal love in the abyss. Perhaps there really was love, but the love in the abyss was completely different from human love. Among the rulers, the Queen of Rotten Dreams wasn't known for her benevolence. Rather, it was the complete opposite. She was known for being a vicious woman who liked to toy with her prey. Did existences like her really have maternal love? Huai Shi could think of the answer, even if he used his feet to think. After thinking about Crow's evaluation of Rotten Dreams, a vague guess appeared in his mind. Perhaps Rotten Dreams' goal in giving birth to this child wasn't so simple. As the most embarrassing idiot in the group that Crow called her, the weakest existence among all rulers, the reason why the Queen of Rotten Dreams did this was simply too simple. She was limited by her own limits. She wanted to give birth to a child who was better than herself, and then, regardless of whether it was devouring, using a ritual to fuse, or even sacrificing or trading, there would be no hesitation or soft-heartedness. Unfortunately, despite all her calculations, she didn't expect the growth of the remnant of the world to be so exaggerated. And, most importantly, her child had the same intentions as her. As a result, the tragic accident of capsizing was inevitable. The Queen of Rotten Dreams, who had survived all kinds of storms for so many years, had been forced into such a situation by her own bloodline and child. It was as if she had worked hard all her life and was about to retire. She had to sell her house and blood to work to pay off her gambling debts. It was as pitiful and sad as that. Now that she had encountered such an ending, there was naturally nothing to say. What Huai Shi was more curious about was what role Golden Dawn played in this process. No matter what, those bad people weren't here to do good things. But what did this have to do with him, Lu Peppa of the Huai Sea? This already involved the remnant of the world. For someone like him, who could only fight in his dreams, he would be beaten back to his original form as soon as he opened his eyes. Then anyone would step on him, and he would be completely cold. It was better to find a place to rest. Don't worry, the Astronomy Society isn't weak enough to rely on you to turn the tables. Beelzebub squatted on his lap and comforted him. I'm afraid there's nothing for you to do now. They probably sent you here as insurance. If they want to kill Rotten Dreams this time, you can still do some damage. Now, just watch the show and wait for help. I was planning to do the whole thing. Why didn't they even give me a chance? Huai Shi clicked her tongue unhappily, but in fact, she was also relieved. Golden Dawn and the other Abyss otakus were too scheming. To be honest, if he really did it, he might feel a little guilty. Now that he wasn't needed, he was naturally happy to slack off. This was the good thing about being a tool of the Astronomy Society. Since the organization had arranged it, it would definitely be arranged until the end. At least his safety was guaranteed. Plus, he had already gotten Lord of the Flies. This trip was not a loss. Now, he just had to stay here and watch Beelzebub's little TV show. He could sit and wait for the bosses to finish the rest of the work. He could even add another stroke to his resume. He would have both face and money. A huge profit. Look, it's about to start. In front of the Book of Steel's projection, Beelzebub suddenly spoke. Just as the remnant of the world, the giant upside-down tree, broke out of the mirror, the Stellaris suddenly shook violently. Countless flames spewed out of the enormous train. In the thick mud of the nightmare, the modules of the train started to move, and the cabin plates quickly split apart. Then, huge alchemy equipment rose from the sealed compartments, whizzed out along the rails, and quickly joined together in the fierce operation. The containers scattered all over the train instantly fell apart. Layers of heavy cannons were quickly extended under the assembly of thousands of mechanical hands, violently connecting to the engine room of the train. Immediately after, he drew out all the source fuel in the warehouse that was enough to blow up several Stellaris, and the terrifying heat gushing out of the reactor was continuously converted into violent electricity. Within the barrel of the cannon, a tyrannical light shone like the scorching sun. The febrile wind swept across and spread in all directions. The violent heat dissipation almost raised the temperature of the entire Stellaris to more than 30 degrees. Some areas even completely melted in the high temperature, and steel evaporated. Enduring the constant erosion of the abyss nightmare, Yenshur, who was hiding in the Stellaris, finally launched a counterattack. In an instant, accompanied by the roar of steel being forcibly torn apart, the heavy cannon pierced out of the Stellaris. A terrifying 5,000 millimeters caliber was aimed at the giant double helix pillar close at hand. The cannon was loaded. The relic weapon that was meticulously created by a Grandmaster, the destructive weapon named Jupiter, vibrated violently under the 16 electromagnetic accelerations. The metal on the shell quickly evaporated and peeled off, revealing a ball of condensed, terrifying electricity. It was a pity that even though such a huge weapon of war was powerful, it still took a long time to build. Even if it was only a short 3 or 4 seconds. It was enough for Mathers, who was close at hand, to react. He mockingly glanced at the futile resistance in the cage, raised his hand, and clenched it. Instantly, the giant double helix pillar in front of the cannon began to rapidly multiply. The secret instrument formed by the blood of the abyss rapidly strengthened and grew. It even extended a large hand and violently pulled at the cannon. Then there was the sound of a water bottle being smashed. "Pah!" A soft sound came from behind Mathers. Chapter 428. A soft sound came from behind Mathers. He froze on the spot and lowered his head in shock. He saw the wound that suddenly appeared on his chest, and blood slowly flowed out from it. But what was even more terrifying was not the wound on his flesh, but the bullet that shot into his body from behind. Numbered spell bullet. Sequence ST-173. It was a convenient weapon that the Astronomy Society had meticulously created for high-threat targets. Every single one of them pursued extreme lethality and power at all costs. They did not hesitate to increase the cost by 10 times or even 100 times, just to increase the power by an insignificant amount. Now, the bullet that was full of cursed poison shattered in his chest, causing the skin around his wound to quickly pale and dehydrate. It turned into a handful of snowflake-like ashes and rustled down. Even if it did not kill him, it still left a tragic hole in his chest. The change in the secret instrument was interrupted. In fact, this sudden attack had even exposed a weakness that he shouldn't have. When he slowly turned his head, he saw 2 figures struggling out of the black mud behind him. The first to walk out was a tireless steel-like figure. As the nightmare mud slid down, it revealed a metallized body. Under the traces of rust, the silver light shone. It was like an indomitable tin soldier in a fairy tale. After passing through the long nightmare, he carried his companion's arm and walked out of the corrosion of the rotten dream, returning to the world again. He had completed his final mission. Beside him was a figure that could be said to be thin. Black mud slowly slid down her hair and suit, revealing a pale face and the heavy breathing device on her face. She did not sleep in the nightmare, nor did she hide in the defense. Instead, she chose to face the nightmare with a clear mind, using her rationality to resist the erosion of despair and pain. Behind the goggles, her eyes were still calm, without any collapse or madness. It was as if the person who was eroded by the nightmare was an unknown cat or dog that had nothing to do with her. She just calmly aimed, raised her arm, and used all the strength she had saved for this, pulling the trigger without trembling. At the most critical moment, the greetings from the Astronomy Society were sent. Letting the rusty pistol fall from her fingertips, she raised her hand, took off the troublesome breathing device, and waved goodbye to Mathers. "I hope we can never meet again." In that instant, the roar of the giant cannon soared into the sky. The frenzied lightning gathered into a beam and spewed out from it, as if a god had thrown down a lightning spear from the clouds. It crudely smashed the layers of obstacles in front of it, creating deep cracks on the crisscrossing double spiral pillars. Ignoring the layers of erosion and deflection, it went straight ahead. In the end, in the seal of the double helix secret instrument, a shallow trace was cut open. It was just a thin line. However, it had completely broken through the Golden Dawn's blockade and once again connected the Stellaris to the outside world. In the blink of an eye, the rainbow light descended from the sky, whistling through the air. If the Bifrost in the present realm were to cast a beam of power into the inner side of the astral cruiser, countless rays of light would soar into the sky and whiz away under the guidance of the Bifrost. At this moment, on the Stellaris, all the passengers, staff, members of the Astronomy Society, and even the dream formed by the masses in the deepest part of the rotten dream disappeared from the Stellaris under the teleportation of the Bifrost. When countless figures appeared on the huge teleportation platform at the border of the capital, the staff at the scene and in the command room couldn't help but exclaim in excitement. Even in the central decision-making room of the Central Bureau, many people finally breathed a sigh of relief. The hostage rescue was successfully completed. Next, they could launch an attack without any scruples. The slight imperfection was that when the personnel of the dispatch department checked the list and number later, they noticed something was wrong in the report from the capital. Excluding the 6 unlucky people who were confirmed to have died, the 402 passengers who got off the ship early, and the members of the Finite Society, everyone on the Stellaris should have appeared here. But why is there one missing? The clerk frowned blankly and looked at the only name on the empty list of missing people. The supervisor of the Astronomy Society in Shanghai. Why, sure. 5 minutes ago, when Jupiter's lightning exploded, the book of steel slowly closed. "Get ready." Beelzebub looked up and said, "We should go." Huh? Weisher was shocked. So soon. It's the Astronomy Society, after all. No matter how ridiculous it is now, the foundation is there, Beelzebub said. Beelzebub told him, "I think it won't be long before the Rainbow Bridge connects here and takes us away. After that, everything here will have nothing to do with you and me. Speaking of which, how's your house? It should be big, right? It's considered big, right?" Weisher thought for a moment and scratched his head. Sparks flew. "There's a small yard. What's wrong? Is there a bookshelf? I'm afraid it'll be hard for me to stay like this after I leave here." Beelzebub sighed regretfully. "You don't seem to like reading. Just make a shelf and put me on it when you don't need it. Can you connect me to a Wi-Fi connection while you're at it? Don't worry. Broadband at the border, 5 gigabits. I can download everything in seconds." Weisher asked, "Do you have any other requests?" Beelzebub thought for a moment and shook his head calmly. "But is it really okay to leave like this?" Weisher asked again. "Are you really going to leave like this?" Beelzebub was amused. "Do I have to settle down in the rotten dream? It's not completely the rotten dream, right?" Weisher shook his head and looked at him intently. Before the rotten dream invaded the Stellaris, who did this dream belong to? Beelzebub? Beelzebub did not answer. "It's Orton's dream, right?" Weisher sighed softly. "Isn't what you've been trying to maintain the last thing he left in this world? Otherwise, you could have just left. After being given life, even if you don't have legs, you wouldn't have been trapped in the engine room for so many years, right?" Beelzebub was silent for a long time before answering calmly. "As the central control system of Oris's, I have to follow the user's orders." "But as Beelzebub?" Weisher stared straight at him. After gaining a sense of self, you're no longer a tool, right? Tools don't give themselves names, Beelzebub. Tools also don't cry for others and provoke the Golden Dawn. Is Orton's order for you to feel indignant for him? Or will he let you stay alone on the Stellaris just to maintain a remnant dream? In silence, he opened his palm and summoned the projection of the Book of Destiny. He showed it to the blond youth in front of him and asked solemnly, "Answer me, Beelzebub. What was Orton's last order?" Beelzebub closed his eyes and sighed helplessly. Once again, he recalled the contractor who smiled at him when he was dying. His face was covered in blood, but it seemed to be filled with sunshine. He reached out and pressed on its cover. Using the last of his strength, he released it from its restraints. When it opened its eyes in confusion for the first time and faced this world, it saw that regretless and pathetic smile. "Sorry, this must be very cruel to you, right?" Orton looked at the fluorescent light on the cover and murmured softly, "After I die, there will be no more orders to restrain you. Lord of the Flies, will you feel angry or relieved?" He hugged his last companion softly and murmured, "If you're lost, follow your own wishes and give yourself a new name. Then, make new friends and go on adventures with them." It was as if he could see that kind of future. The man named Orton smiled longingly as he gave his final order. "From now on, you're free to live." From the moment he was born, Beelzebub had never cried. But when Orton closed his eyes, he started to hate himself for not being able to cry. From that day until today, he had been repenting for his birth. If he hadn't given it his last strength, no, if he had taken away the strength he had accumulated all this time, Orton would have been able to persevere, right? Perhaps there would have been a 1 in 10,000 chance that he would be rescued. For the first and last time in his life, Lord of the Flies disobeyed the contractor's order. It stayed in Orton's last dream and didn't start a new life as the contractor hoped. Instead, it used all its strength to maintain the existence of all of this. It hoped that one day, the signal for help scattered in the abyss would be received and its companions from the utopia would arrive. It would then send Orton's last dream back to the kingdom of heaven and introduce itself as a noble and loyal friend to everyone. It would tell those people that even in the end, his noble ideals and character had never wavered. It would tell the future generations everything about him, the legend of Orton. But in the long years, no one came. The kingdom of heaven had abandoned them. Only it remained here alone, preserving Orton's last trace. Day after day, year after year, it waited quietly, until one day, a young man from afar embarked on an ill-fated journey. It opened its eyes from its deep sleep, full of joy. At the same time, it began to fear the departure that was about to happen. "Now, answer me, Beelzebub," Huaisher asked softly. "Is it really okay to leave like this?" Beelzebub wanted to tell him that it was okay. As a tool, it didn't matter where it was. But in fact, he knew that it wasn't okay. Not at all. He didn't want to leave. He didn't want to abandon all his past memories here and watch his most precious treasures disappear into the dust with his own eyes. Just thinking about it made him feel like he was about to cry. If he could cry to express the sadness of leaving, he would feel less guilty when he left, right? He could forget Orton shamelessly and start a new life. But is it really okay to leave like this, Beelzebub? "Sorry, Huaisher, I don't want to leave." He choked, lowered his head, and begged, "Please help me. Even if it's meaningless, at least let me do it for Orton, for him." "Okay." Huaisher nodded. "I'll help you, Beelzebub." He didn't wait for him to finish. The apocalypse dragon raised his sharp claws and gently placed them on his hair. He told him, "Don't worry, because you're my friend." Chapter 429. When the light of the Bifrost faded into the darkness, an even more mournful light descended from the sky. A huge shadow rose from hell once again and swept across the endless sea, scattering burning dust. Under the huge pair of wings, the dancing sparks fell rapidly and rapidly enlarged. In the end, the entire dark deep space was covered by the ubiquitous blazing fire. It was as if 100,000 suns had descended into the sea abyss here. Countless vicious lava streams gushed out from the blazing suns and surrounded them, forming a solemn crown. However, this heat that could boil the endless sea did not fall on the astral. Instead, it gathered towards the miraculous seal in his hand as the flame giant roared. Surtur's body was rapidly expanding. In an instant, he went from an exaggerated height of dozens of meters to a terrifying form that could hold up the sky. In his hand, the sword of flame quickly shrank. It drew the supply of heat from the sky and glowed with an indescribable dim yellow light. It was like the setting sun that was about to fall below the horizon. Twilight. Under the illumination of this twilight, all things showed signs of decay, as if they were about to welcome their own end. Blade of Annihilation, Levantin, the miraculous seal that played the twilight of the gods in the legends, reappeared here. It collected all the light in the world and announced the arrival of eternal winter and silence. The violent heat that could burn everything and the cold air that could freeze all things and bring death gathered on this sword. Slash! In the blink of an eye, a gully appeared in the endless sea. It extended straight from the giant's feet. Millions of tons of seawater evaporated and then froze. It formed a bleak sea abyss that extended to the end of sight. A shattering sound rang out. It came from countless double helix pillars. Half of it was covered in fire and scorched, while the other half was completely frozen in the absolute zero temperature. The secret ritual forged by the abyss blood was broken in an instant. It was like a tin staff knocking on a clay pot. However, countless scorched and frosted shards floated in the air. On the astral, the staff fell. Mathers slowly raised his head and stared at all of this indifferently. The numbered spell bullets could not kill him. In fact, it couldn't even be considered a serious injury. It was just a loss of flesh and bone. It wasn't even worth mentioning. Even though the Astronomy Association had turned the tables on him, he didn't show the slightest bit of anger. He just raised his hand again and ordered the twin spiral crystals that filled the sky. He said, "I didn't come to the surface to ask you to fight, but to give you peace." On top of the staff, the sharp eyes of the eagle head flashed with light. The crystals in the sky lit up and enveloped the Stellaris, causing the depth value to plummet. Then, the entire Stellaris, along with the decaying dream and the giant tree, began to float. He turned into an illusory shadow. No weapon in the world can harm them. The flame giant roared. Surtur swung his sword again, and the black-robed scholar hovering behind the fire giant, the vice principal of the ivory tower, pulled out a pair of scissors from his robe. He gently cut through the void. Everyone's vision suddenly blurred. The illusory state of the Stellaris suddenly dissipated as if nothing had happened. The giant's sword instantly pierced through the huge train, tearing through the ocean below, boiling the torrent, and evaporating countless amounts of water vapor. Under the sword of flame, both the inverted giant tree and the decaying dream couldn't help but let out a shrill roar as they struggled furiously. As the giant withdrew his sword, the scissors that were closed opened again. The illusory state once again appeared on the Stellaris, but the wound caused by Surtur could no longer be healed. Temporal clipping. Under the vice principal's scissors, Chronos Stigmata completely disrupted time, and even the connection between the events was completely destroyed. He cut the time after the twin spiral was destroyed and before the illusory state, and pieced them together into the illusory state, artificially creating a fatal gap, allowing the giant to calmly inflict heavy damage on the remnant and the decaying dream. But when the attack succeeded, Shay's face suddenly turned pale. He opened his mouth and vomited out a pitch-black blood clot. After the blood clot left his body, it quickly began to distort and transform into a bird. It broke through the air and landed in Marth's hand, where it turned back into blood and condensed again into a sharp twin spiral crystal. "Did you underestimate the enemy, Mr. Shay?" He looked up and glanced at the severely wounded creator unhappily. "You don't think that we have not improved after all these years in the abyss, do you? It's best that you don't use those unpresentable skills again." Unknowingly, he was viciously tricked by Marth. Shay gasped for breath as he raised his hand and refused the vice principal's help. He forced a smile. I didn't expect that I would be the first to be humiliated. It's fine. If that's the case, I'll have to take out something good for you to admire. A small esophagus slowly appeared in his hand. He held it tightly. He pulled out the stopper. In an instant, amber golden liquid flowed out of it and instantly fell into the sea. Wherever it passed, bright light emerged from the sea and rapidly spread as if it could continuously replicate itself. Countless single-celled organisms that were difficult to see with the naked eye crazily multiplied and spread in the sea, emitting a golden light that dispelled all the darkness and illuminated the deep sea, causing the darkness between the sea and the sky to disappear in an instant. And in the amber-like sea, countless primitive species crazily rose and emerged, extending a new ecosystem and spontaneously gnawing at the foundation of the twin spiral. The framework that Marth had created was completely overturned. Please feel free to comment, Lord Marth. Shay wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, "This is the origin of all life, the miracle that sprouted in the sea of mercy, the primordial soup that is eternally brewed by proteins and enzymes V0. 7. As long as this sea water is not exhausted, this place will not be the domain of your abyss bloodline." Marth's expression became solemn. He did not expect that Shay's attainments in oceanography would be able to trace back to the primordial era and restore the process of life sprouting in the primordial sea, entering the core of biology in an alternative way. However, he quickly realized what was going on. How the hell was this biology? What this bastard had created was indeed the source of the birth of creatures in the present realm. But when he carefully traced it back, he found that the structure of life was completely different from what he had imagined. What he had created was not life. It would be better to say that it was purely inanimate. At this moment, in the sea of light, every ray of light and every wisp of gold was countless tiny cells that were exactly the same. Their functions were only the simplest of self-growth, self-replication, and self-iteration. In other words, this was a biological von Neumann machine of the trillions. This was not a paradise for primitive creatures. It was more like hell. Even if it continued for hundreds of millions of years and swallowed up everything in the world, it would never be able to give birth to an existence with a soul. There would only be countless extremely complicated autonomous robots. In the range of the soup of life, all the secrets and frameworks of his abyss bloodline would be suppressed, but he would not be able to gain any advantage at all. This bastard actually flipped the table. It was as if a radioactive dirty bomb had suddenly appeared in the midst of an intense firefight. It was not for the purpose of victory, but to make everyone suffer along with him. Could it be that he could not afford to play? The vice principal of the Ivory Tower had obviously already realized what this was. His gloomy expression became more and more unsightly, and he moved further away. But he could not move away, nor could he even escape. If they had the advantage with the hostage in hand earlier, now it was their turn to defend. One careless move. Inscribe. Esraighalamo dream. My blood is strong, Marth announced in a low voice, once again spawning countless double helix pillars, and based the framework he had created using the laws on it, he launched a defense against the corrosion of the soup of life. He seemed to be quite unhappy with his colleague's laziness, and he turned around and urged, "Hey, is the land of dreams not ready yet?" In the fierce battle, the two abyssal ominous stars helplessly shook their heads, raised their hands, and pointed at the dark abyss above their heads. In the dark abyss, a pure white glow had unknowingly lit up. Sacred light slowly descended from the abyss, enveloping the entire sky. It was the kingdom created by the golden dawn in the abyss, the result of its creation, or rather, the strongest weapon. Moving hell, the land of dreams. But now, it was difficult for the land of dreams to rise again, and could not approach the depths of the border. Because in front of the sacred pure white light, countless shadows that resembled a group of whales slowly appeared. Those were warships, thousands of huge alchemy warships, accompanied by countless roaring cannon fire and blazing light that rose and fell continuously, emerged from the abyss. 13 depths away, the Astronomy Society's fleet had come into direct contact with the Golden Dawn and began a saturation bombardment. The Deep Sky Legion. It was the fearless fleet that was unique to the Deep Sky Legion. This legion that had been driving alchemy warships to patrol the depths since its establishment responded to the Astronomy Society's order, urgently rising, and the main battle forces completed their preparations and lockdown within 8 hours. The moment they detected the appearance of the Land of Dreams, they took the lead in launching an attack. The battle that was far more intense than here spread in the abyss, and there were already countless abyssal creatures and ascendants fighting. The 6 vassal abyssal legions of the Deep Sky Fleet had all moved out and started a nightmarish battle with the abyssal creatures raised by the Golden Dawn. Tisk, 1 or 2 of them are unreliable at the crucial moment. Marth could not help but shake his head. He reached out and took out 4 ancient rings from his pocket, lifted them up, and threw them into the air. A high-pitched horn flute played in the void. Following the contract, dozens of huge shadows rose from the abyss, and a large group of lords directly penetrated the lockdown of the Deep Sky Legion, responding to the summons. At the same time, the light of the Rainbow Bridge continued to descend from the sky, and huge figures walked out one after another. The war began again. No, it should be said that it had never stopped. At this moment, it was even more ferocious. And in the rotten dream, Huaisher stared at all this, dumbfounded. He thought for a while, analyzed carefully, and considered carefully. Did I agree too quickly just now? He looked up and asked, "Is it too late for me to get off?" Above the steel robot that was as huge as a fortress, Beelzebub, who was controlling a huge welding torch, sneered and directly welded Osiris's exit shut. "You still want to get off now? Too late." Chapter 430. At this moment, the inside of the decaying dream that everyone had forgotten about was rapidly collapsing. The nightmare was shrinking. It was being devoured. The queen of the decaying dream was wailing in pain. Most of her body was quickly melting under the entanglement of the surviving demons. But in the inside of the dream, there were still little ghosts that were devouring food in large bites. It was like eating an unlimited buffet. Huaisher continuously stuffed the monsters condensed from origin substance into his mouth, chewing until they were crunchy. His current body had been specially modified by the Astronomy Association to deal with the decaying dream. It was a record. In essence, it was no different from Beelzebub's. It was just that Beelzebub could eat more. After being verified by the Witch's Knight, it had been madly modified by the creators of the Survival Institute and the R&D department. It could be said that if the enemy this time was only a rotten dream, the tool Huaisher would be able to restrain more than 40% of her energy. But now, due to a freak combination of factors, the heavily injured decaying dream was being devoured by the surviving demons and had no ability to resist. After devouring most of the monsters in the decaying dream, Huaisher's body had grown to a size that the dream could no longer contain. However, this power was based on the decaying dream. Once it left, it would probably return to its original size. Huaisher didn't have any objections to this. He was already breaking even with the hack that the Astronomy Association had given him. Why would he still need a bike? When he came back to his senses, apart from the loud sounds of construction, there was only Beelzebub's noisy singing coming from the loudspeaker in the dream. Who is that? Who is that? Who is that? That's a tool. A tool. A tool. Carrying the name of a traitor, a man who gave up everything to fight. Beelzebub, who was wearing a pair of goggles, excitedly sang at the top of his voice, accompanied by the blazing light of the welding torch. Gather all the qualities of a traitor in one body, a hero of justice, a traitor. Hey, let's not talk about the lyrics for now. Why did a hero suddenly change from a tool to a traitor? Is there something wrong? Isn't it you? Beelzebub retorted, holding the Book of Fates and hiding in the Directorate of Defense is a genius idea. Who would have thought that the future master of celestial genealogy would be a salted fish in the central administration? To be honest, this idea is really great. The more eye-catching you are now, the less people will associate you with the utopia. No, I'm just doing a part-time job occasionally. It's also for sponsored partnerships. Fleischer scratched his head and thought for a long time. He did not know how to prove to Beelzebub that his main goal was to become a cellist. Why did he look so good at the beginning, but now he looked like a ghost? Amidst the deafening roar, a large steel plate was lifted up by a crane and welded with a welding torch to mend the large crack on Osiris' chest. He patched it. He had to admit that Beelzebub's craftsmanship was too ugly. What an eyesore. This was the deepest part of the decaying dream, where the dreamscape of Stellaris was located. It was the last trace left behind by Orton before his death. After most of the fragments fell into the abyss, this was the last remnant of Osiris. You'd better not have too much hope. Beelzebub took off his welding mask regretfully and sighed softly. Only the fragments of the stigmata are left here. All the physical strengthening equipment and supporting weapons are almost all gone. In the eternal road of celestial genealogy, all the stigmata could be materialized in the current world in material form. If Beelzebub became Horus at level 5, he would build an eternal fortress in the deep space. If he chose Osiris, he would materialize the giant of judgment of the underworld. However, the stigmata was usually only the foundation. More things needed to be supplemented and installed with material. In other words, it was money. Now, the giant of the underworld in front of Fleischer was completely paralyzed. The plus 15 godly equipment that the Utopia had spent a lot of money on was completely gone. There were also serious problems with the power system and external torso. Now, under Beelzebub's rough maintenance, the problems seemed to have worsened. It was just a temporary solution. Just for this temporary use, Beelzebub used a destructive repair method to temporarily repair it. It had been asleep for too long. Even if it was woken up now, it would probably not be of much use. Beelzebub might as well tear down Peter to repair Paul so that it could run the last kilometer with dignity. As Osiris's former radar controller, central intelligence, and even auxiliary maintenance division, Beelzebub did these things very smoothly. Even though he could only use the temporary toolkit, his efficiency was still shocking. That was his duty to begin with. He should be the one to complete it. Just like a surgeon, he treated his former master coldly and precisely. He broke open the shell, took out the bullets, dismantled the skeleton, and reconnected the cables. He dismantled the core and reconnected the circuits. He repaired the holes and made its body complete again. After so many years, he seemed to have prepared for a long time. When he really started to implement it, his movements were swift and fast. He dismantled the steel giant and reassembled it. He abandoned the 4 useless arms and replaced them to repair the legs and other joints. Blood, fascia, bones, organs, programs, and even the body. Every part was roughly and precisely reorganized until finally, the broken giant gradually became complete. In the silence, it seemed to be in a long sleep, waiting for the return of the soul, waiting for the final awakening. On the hangar, Beelzebub threw down the control stick and took a step back. He took a deep breath. His hands trembled slightly. "Are you scared?" Fleischer asked. "Or are you worried that Orton will reject your awakening?" "I don't know. I'm just..." Beelzebub was silent for a long time and said in a low voice, very nervous, "Even if the underworld machine Osiris woke up again, it would not be Orton's resurrection. At most, it would only awaken part of his remaining consciousness. But now, how is he going to face Orton's illusion? He did not know. He even started to feel afraid. Will he scold me? Beelzebub asked softly. I don't know. Maybe he'll be angry? Fleischer sighed. After all, he slept for so long and was woken up again. He must be very angry. Just angry. Maybe he'll complain a little more. I don't know him well, so I'm not sure. Fleischer shook his head. But I'm sure of one thing. As long as you call him, he'll definitely wake up. No matter where he is, he'll respond to your voice. Beelzebub, you're his most important friend and partner. Huaishur said firmly. The treasure he chose to leave behind in this world is not this broken dream, but the complete you. He trusts you so much, so you should trust him too. Beelzebub was silent for a long time and turned to look at him. I'll remind you one last time. After this violent awakening, I'm not sure how many of Osiris's stigmata will be left. Don't feel sad when the time comes. I'm already feeling sad. Hurry up. Huaishur sighed. He raised his claws and grabbed the handle made of countless tangled cables in front of him. Next, it was his mission. He used all the source substances he had swallowed from the rotten dream to activate Osiris's function. At its peak, Osiris's energy source was the highest essence extracted from high-purity and dense source substance crystals. When it was activated, hundreds of millions of dollars burned every second. Now that it was used by Huaishur as a tool, it was like changing the fuel of a fighter jet from aviation gasoline to kerosene. Not only was the model different, but it was not cost-effective as an energy source. Even if Osiris had a backup energy conversion device, it was still difficult. Even Beelzebub was not sure if this method would work. You have to try, right? Huaishur shook his head and urged, hurry up, or you won't be able to catch the last bus. You don't have to tell me that. Beelzebub took a deep breath and pulled the switch. Osiris, the Hell Destroyer, charging begins. In that instant, Osiris's dim eyes suddenly lit up with a faint glow. Then, Huaishur felt as if she was holding a black hole in her hand. Wait, did I not think it through enough? He panicked for a moment. Then, he couldn't help but let out a mournful roar. Dragon's roar. Wild electric light rose from his body like a thunderstorm. Thousands of blazing electric arcs painfully lashed out in all directions. The moment Huaishur released the source substance, he felt a torrent of source substance rush out from his claws. Blazing light shone from the countless cables. This was followed by countless overloads of high heat. Countless stabilizers erupted into dazzling flames and thick smoke in an instant, ending under the extraction of Osiris's instinctive ability. Even Huaishur felt a wave of dizziness, and his vision turned black. When he finally reacted, he found that he had begun to shrink. As the origin substance began to seep out, countless scales began to fall from his body. His originally mountain-like body also began to shrink. What replaced it was a blazing light that gradually lit up in Osiris's eyes. It was like a dying traveler in the desert thirsting for spring water. Amidst the low rumbling, the central control system finally woke up from its silence. It controlled countless surging electric currents and began a new round of self-examination. 5%. Beelzebub turned around and shouted excitedly, Huaishur, work harder! Osiris is waking up. Huaishur couldn't hear what he was saying at all. The moment Osiris's eyes lit up, he felt the silent steel giant in front of him suddenly raise his head and stare at Huaishur's face. He reached out and grabbed Osiris's wrist. Then, he was swallowed by the terrifying electric currents that rose from his body. It was as if he was swallowed by a black hole in an instant. He couldn't feel his body anymore. It was as if he had melted into the source substance and was rushing through the endless circuits with a mighty torrent. Along the way, lights scattered, illuminating the endless darkness. Finally, he rose in the blazing light. The sound of blood flowing in his body could be heard. It was like a tidal wave, surging violently. The intense pain from the decomposition seemed to be just an illusion. He could feel his body again, and in a daze, the figure standing in front of him. The young man was lowering his head and saying something to Beelzebub. Sensing his gaze, he reached out with a smile, pulled him up from the darkness, and patted his shoulder. Huaishur saw his lips open and close silently. It was as if he was saying goodbye. The young man looked at them one last time and placed a small key in Huaishur's hand. Without any more worries, he turned and walked into the light. He disappeared. Then, a cold mechanical voice woke him up from his stupor. Osiris's first authority transfer is complete. New pilot login complete. Welcome to the underworld, Your Excellency Huaishur. Osiris's preheating on the judgment machine has been completed. Awaiting your orders. Huaishur opened his eyes and saw the unfamiliar world in front of him. It was as if he had dozens of pairs of eyes. He saw everything in front of him, behind him, under his feet, and to his left and right at the same time. He saw the colors, materials, distances, sizes, and even attributes of objects. He could even see through the appearance of objects. Like a psychic mirror, he could see all the changes in the source substance. Soon, he realized that Osiris had disappeared. No, he had turned into Osiris. More importantly, Beelzebub, I think I saw Orton just now. Yes, I know. Beelzebub had his back to him. He lowered his head and wiped his face hard. Suddenly, he asked loudly, Huaishur, can you still fight? Of course. Huaishur chuckled softly. It's just charging. It's not a problem at all. As he spoke, Huaishur felt countless cables connected to his consciousness like blood vessels. He could feel the mighty pulse formed by countless electric currents, the roar of the steel heart, and the deep breathing that was as cold as the wind in the underworld. As the blazing electric light swept across, the steel giant raised his silent head and stared at the gradually collapsing sky of hell. His eyes shot out a piercing light, tearing apart layers of nightmares. He looked at the turbulent ocean and abyss outside. He raised his palm. Then let's go, my friend. Beelzebub said softly, the moment that belongs to us is coming. Ah, the app has been launched today. I'm so happy. It's finally my turn to do something so impressive. Thank you for your support all this time. Please take care of me in the future. Also, do my good brothers and sisters still have monthly tickets? Blinking. Chapter 431. At the same time, what pierced everyone's eardrums was the final sorrowful cry from the ruler. Countless sticky nightmares pierced out in all directions. It was like a trick of magnetic fluid under the attraction of a magnet. But the moment those sharp spikes solidified, a grayish-white color rapidly appeared from the end. They broke inch by inch and turned into ashes. Only the slimy nightmare in the middle that was constantly squirming tried to escape from the roots. Death had arrived. The rotten dream was about to be eaten up by the upside-down tree. Everyone could imagine how happy the gulping sound of the cola would be when it was about to be emptied. Between the countless withered branches of the surviving evil, there were sounds of babies laughing happily. They felt full and happy, and they expressed their gratitude to their mothers. At that moment, unknowingly, the last part of the huge upside-down tree had already left the edge of the mirror realm. In the midst of the sweet meal, it forgot about everything and left the safe zone. In order to pick up the candies that kept appearing on the ground, it did not realize that it had walked further and further away. It left the safe cradle and walked into the dangerous tiger's den. No, it should be said that the moment it disregarded the group of mortals around it with contempt, it was destined to be in a tragic situation. My blood is strong. Mathers opened his arms and chanted loudly. The distorted crystals floating in the sky glowed with a blazing light, sprinkling down their blessings. Law Framework Double Helix. This was a world modification tool that was meticulously woven by the Creator. Under the intertwining of ingenious thinking and knowledge, it was a wonderful secret instrument that could change the world. With Mather's full control, all of the lords of the swarm that were reflected instantly let out a roar. The miraculous disaster from the abyss descended upon them, turning into blood-red flames that caused their power to skyrocket rapidly. Bone-white masks covered their eerie faces, and in the end, a blood-red halo rose. At the same time, all the creatures that did not belong to the abyss felt the deep malice and suppression of this world. The air became as hard as iron, and they could not breathe. The boiling blood began to lose control and mutate. They had to suppress it with all their might. The situation was not good. Jaeger's projection looked up. Deep Sky Army, prepare to fire immediately. Is a Rainbow Bridge transmission not ready yet? Too late. Mathers sneered. He turned around and stared at the surviving evil that had already entered the cage. After preparing for such a long time, after spending so much effort and planning so many plans, finally, when it was time to reap the rewards, boom. A shrill hiss suddenly burst forth, and the ear-piercing sound was like a blade scraping against his eardrums, causing his smile to suddenly stiffen for a moment. At that moment, everyone saw the scene of a nightmare, as if being ignited, heated, and boiled by 100,000 suns at the same time. Countless painful bubbles quickly rose from the painful dream and exploded, transmitting to the world the roar of an engine from hell. Light. There was a light in the darkness. It disappeared in a flash. In the next moment, the darkness opened up, and just like the seawater in front of the saint, it rolled out to both sides in horror. And in the sea of nightmares, a majestic and massive figure riding on a pair of wings of light soared into the sky amidst a mighty roar. He burst out of the decaying dream. This was a ferocious silhouette that contained all of the sharpness and solemnity in the world, a dignified face that had been tempered thousands of times in the flames of disaster. The giant's eyes glowed with the light of origin substance. On its back, 46 engines glowed with a brilliant golden light, as if it were spreading its wings. From the depths of the nightmare, he rose upwards. He revealed his appearance above the chaotic sea, and in an instant that no one had expected, he charged forward like an iron wind, thunder, and fire. Immediately afterwards, an uppercut, as the engines roared. The 321-meter-tall judgment machine, the underworld giant, spun around and stomped down on the decaying dream's ugly face. The underworld giant clenched his iron fist, and a pale white figure covered in high-frequency vibrations punched towards the sky. In front of this iron fist, which had been accumulating power for a long time, everything in front of it quickly collapsed like a bubble. The air wailed as it collapsed, forming streaks of electricity that spread out in all directions. The inverted trees trembled violently. Ear-piercing cries of infants could be heard from the treetops. A terrible crack had already extended from the roots of the tree, creating a massive gap. Drops of viscous tree sap dripped down from the crack, landing on the dark green armor and transforming into a vicious poison. But immediately afterwards, the origin substance armor disdainfully ignored it. You didn't expect it, did you? Mommy gave birth to a little brother for you. The underworld giant slowly walked out of the nightmare, reached out, and grabbed the massive roots of the inverted trees. He lowered his head and looked at the surviving evil in front of him. His dignified iron face moved closer, and he spoke in a raspy voice. Are you surprised? Are you pleasantly surprised, Oni, Chan? In the blink of an eye, an old hen had turned into a duck. Let alone the Golden Dawn and the Astronomical Society, even the surviving evil never expected that a little bastard would suddenly jump out and split their inheritance with them. But when they saw how this bastard was stomping on Rotten Dream, they knew that he was definitely not related by blood. Even if he was, who said that he couldn't be eaten? Countless roots wrapped around Huaishi's body, causing the repulsive armor around him to emit a sharp screech. But immediately afterwards, the underworld giant pulled out a heavy handle from his waist and infused it with origin substance. A blazing light surged out from the handle, rapidly extending from both ends. One end was as sharp as a spear, while the other end was inconceivably curved, forming a strange hook. It was a scepter, the shepherd's scepter. Huaishir clenched his fists and suddenly raised the scepter, thrusting it forward. The sharp end of the scepter deeply wedged itself into the roots of the surviving evil, piercing through them and coming out from the other end. It was like a hot knife cutting through wax. The shepherd's scepter easily pierced through the roots, which were capable of ignoring all attacks. Judgment, the inherent talent of Osiris's stigmata, causing 100% damage to all hell creatures. It could not be weakened, avoided, or blocked. The underworld giant roared and pulled out the shepherd's scepter, sweeping it horizontally. The head of the scepter, which was almost bent into a ring, emitted countless rays of metallic light, as if it was leading a steel storm. A tragic crack instantly appeared on the huge trunk, and countless tree barks and branches flew out. Osiris's dark green face was revealed. There were also flames of anger in his eyes. At that moment, Mathers finally understood. Osiris. No, Lord of the Flies, right? He asked coldly. Why are you so stubborn, Lord of the Flies? Stand there, Mathers. Don't move. Don't go. A hoarse voice burst out from the body of the Iron Giant, carrying the anger and grief that had been accumulated for hundreds of years. Beelzebub roared loudly. Today, I will send your mother to heaven. With a sudden punch, Osiris broke free from the surviving evil that was close to him. He dashed towards Mathers, the depth engine behind him bursting with flames, pushing him forward like a cannonball, breaking through the boundaries of the double helix cryptome. Mathers raised his hand expressionlessly. Thus, two massive shadows on the battlefield abruptly turned into bolts of lightning and returned to the astral, blocking Osiris' path. Osiris roared. Because Huaishur was roaring, he felt as if he had been ignited, engulfed by the sorrow, pain, and anger of the underworld giants. The moment he saw Mathers, he opened his mouth and roared. On Osiris's face, two blazing rays of light shot out from his eyes. In an instant, it burned the face of a group leader, leaving a tragic scar on the white bone mask. Then, as he charged forward, Huaishur seemed to instinctively control the light wings behind him. He raised the shepherd's staff in his hand, aimed at the nearest group leader, and swept it horizontally. The head of the staff struck its lion-like head like an iron hammer, causing its skull to burst with a wail of cracking. In that instant, the underworld giant in front of him had disappeared. He nimbly turned around and appeared behind it. The shepherd's staff stabbed backward without looking back. The sharp end of the staff pierced through the huge body of the group leader. Judgment! Flames burst forth, and the shadow of a scale suddenly rose from Osiris's head. One end of the scale held its pierced heart, and the other end held a feather. The scales lost their balance in an instant. The heart of the Lord of the Swarm sank rapidly due to its own sins and the calamity of hell. What followed was the flame that shot out from the shepherd's staff, incinerating it in the blink of an eye. All the scattered source of life was devoured by the crocodile's shield on Osiris's right arm. The crocodile's eyes emitted a red light, and Huaishur saw that Osiris's energy display had increased by half a bar. Amidst his surprise, he saw another group leader in the fog suddenly pouncing towards him. Under the huge, dirty cloth that looked like a shroud, the wriggling pale fog was bound into a human figure. It held two illusory blades in its hands, and its speed was as fast as lightning. Osiris's free left hand pulled out another short staff from his waist and infused it with origin substance. In an instant, three short staffs that looked like flails formed on top of the staff, pulled by the origin substance ropes, and sent them flying forward. The moment they came into contact with the fog, a dim light shot out from the short staff like an invisible giant mouth. It instantly tore apart the fog and the shroud, easily breaking the strange group leader in half. A wail burst forth, and a rain of blood fell from the white fog, splashing in all directions. Osiris, who was dyed red, rushed out of the blood and fog. His face was ferocious, and the shepherd's staff roared through the air, smashing towards Mathers. Beelzebub roared die. Chapter 432. Faced with the raging shepherd's staff, Mathers finally took a step back. However, his shadow strangely remained where it was. Viscous blood continuously gushed out from the shadow. Following that, strips of bright red flesh and tendons rapidly grew out and intertwined with each other on the pure white skeleton. In an instant, a human silhouette was formed. The four bony wings on the back spread out, and pure white feathers rapidly grew out of it. A holy halo rose from its head, sprinkling pure white light. Then it illuminated a hideous mess of flesh and blood. On the perfect body, all the organs were intact, the muscles were well proportioned, and the origin substance was burning vigorously. However, from the beginning to the end, not a single inch of skin was covered. All the muscles and tendons were exposed under the light of the halo, as if the skin had been fiercely peeled off by something, leaving behind such a hideous appearance. As the grayish-white eyeballs moved quickly, two golden eyes lit up, looking at Osiris, who was close at hand. The muscular palm raised, 5 fingers spread out. Boom! An invisible barrier appeared in front of the fingers, blocking the impact of the shepherd's staff. Then, the skinning angel took a step forward, extracting the blood from the double helix secret instrument, and grew rapidly. After 3 steps, it had turned into a giant that was not inferior to Osiris. It raised its arms covered in viscous blood and suddenly grabbed the steel wrists. It wrestled with steel. "I'm sorry, Lord of the Flies. I don't have time to play games with children." Mathers took off his hat indifferently and said coldly, "Let this artificial angel, Casimir, play with you. I still have things to do." At that moment, the elegant middle-aged gentleman suddenly disintegrated, turning into endless black blood that swept towards the inverted tree, instantly engulfing it in an all-pervasive manner. In an instant, the fragments of the double helix crystal fell from the sky like a rainstorm. They were growing rapidly and multiplying crazily, forming crisscrossing spears. Wrapped in the terrifying blessing from the land of dreams, they had deeply wedged the laws and framework that Mathers had created in his life into the body of the surviving evil. The crystal cage instantly sealed the remaining evil within. In the distance, the vice principal raised his wrist again and cut the scissors. Everyone's eyes were dazzled for a moment, but then they were dazzled again. With a loud bang, the scissors in the vice principal's hand cracked open. Cold laughter came from the land of dreams far away in the abyss. After all, there was a limit to the time sequence. Sometimes, it didn't even matter what the sequence was. As long as they could ensure that a few key stages weren't interfered with, the result would always be on their side. Within the pool of blood in the crystal cage, Masser's face appeared, and he glanced indifferently at Osiris. Then, countless twin spiral crystals pierced out of the angel's back. Strands of light surged within it. It was as if a long time had passed in an instant. The skinning angel's flesh and blood rotted rapidly, emitting a foul stench. However, the beast's face gradually revealed itself from the flesh and blood, becoming more and more ferocious. It raised its head high and smashed down on Osiris's head. Huaisher's vision suddenly went dark. He could feel the terrifying tremors spreading from Osiris's transmission, causing a stream of black blood to flow out of his mouth and nose. It was just the feedback of origin form. Huaisher couldn't withstand such a large body. In the end, it was because his position as the pilot was not compatible with Osiris's original body, so he couldn't fully unleash his abilities. The rotting angel raised its head as if nothing had happened. It let go of its hand and pulled out a slender bone knife from between its rotting wings. Moving forward, it suddenly stabbed into Osiris's abdomen. Huaisher's vision blurred again. He felt dizzy and his ears were ringing. "Huaisher, can you take it?" Beelzebub's anxious voice sounded. "Shut up. You're so annoying." Huaisher yelled angrily. "It's just a bump, and you have to shout twice. Am I a kindergarten kid?" "Ha! There won't be a good ending if you still try to be brave," Beelzebub said. "Why do you care so much?" Huaisher swallowed a mouthful of rusty blood. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to wake up. "Be good and watch my performance." It wasn't like he was going to die. Plus, he was already used to dying. It was just dizziness. It was nothing. In the intense pain, Osiris roared. Ignoring the wound on his abdomen, he actually forced the rotting angel to run forward. "You like to stab people?" Huaisher studied the rotting face. He reached out and pressed the bone knife in his abdomen, grabbing it along with the rotting angel's hand. He suddenly tightened his grip. With a shattering sound, the hand and the handle of the bone knife were crushed into pieces. Casually pulling out the broken blade from his abdomen and throwing it aside, Huaisher raised his hand and aimed it at the rotting angel's head. Left hook. Amidst the roaring thunder, the rotting angel shook violently. Countless pieces of rotten flesh flew up, revealing the ferocious beast face underneath. It stumbled back. "Come on, brother." Huaisher clenched his fists and pressed forward. "Let's spar. Right hook." Boom! Amidst the loud noise, the rotting angel's two eyeballs flew out of their sockets. It raised its hand and blocked in front of it. The invisible wall reappeared. Osiris's shepherd's staff was raised again, aimed at the wall in front of him, and swept. There was a loud roar, the void shook, and the invisible wall collapsed. Then, without waiting for it to begin to repair, the shepherd's staff smashed down again at the same spot. Like swinging a bat, Huaishir violently swung Osiris's excessive power, not minding the feedback and impact it brought. The third time it swept. The invisible wall fell apart, and a terrifying wave of air spread. The shepherd's staff smashed into the rotting angel's head, smashing a crack in its skull. The giant of the underworld roared, stepped forward, and stomped its foot down. One of its legs was completely crushed, and the other foot was firmly on its chest. The shepherd's staff fell, aiming at the frantically struggling beast face. "Don't move," Huaishir said coldly. "The trial has begun, monster." In Osiris's hand, the shepherd's staff was raised, and after making a few gestures, he raised it behind his head and aimed at the head of the rotting angel. Thunder roared, and the staff was swung out. A loud sound burst out. A broken head had already flown into the endless abyss, and it fell without a trace. Good shot. On the spot, the headless corpse quickly collapsed, turning into countless drops of blood. The scarlet Osiris looked back at the inverted giant tree in the crystal cage and grinned. "You want this?" The giant of the underworld stepped forward step by step, trampling on the Stellaris. The two staffs in his hands slowly unfolded. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" "I'll help you." In the shadows, the spider-like behemoth suddenly shot out and entangled Osiris's body. But then it was torn to pieces. Only a few broken limbs fell to the ground and were trampled into mud. Osiris approached step by step. "Don't get in the way, Lord of the Flies." An indifferent giant eye emerged from the blood, coldly looking at the figure that was gradually approaching. "It's just an afterimage of Osiris. What can it do? No matter how unappreciative it is, it should be enough." Accompanied by Marth's cold words, an uproar broke out in the chaos again. In the darkness of the abyss above their heads, a terrifying flame bombarded them like a meteor. A dazzling thunderstorm burst out from it. A skinny old man descended from the sky. His upper body was naked, and the muscles all over his body were entangled on his skeleton like iron wires. He was stooped and ferocious. 36 ferocious dark backs of light hung high behind him. As he waved his fingers casually, the heavenly drum vibrated, and a terrifying power that was dozens of times more powerful than heaven's bane poured out together with the lightning from this skinny body. The one who was once crowned, Indra, once again appeared in the world. But this time, he was no longer the important leader of the Indian lineage, but the king of the outer Tao who had been tainted and solidified by the abyss. Under the layers of support from the Golden Dawn, this person alone suppressed the 4 level 5 ascendants of the Astronomical Association. He even had the time to raise his other hand, aimed at the warship of the Command Bureau in the distance, and snapped his fingers. A thin bolt of lightning burst out from his fingertip, instantly stretching thousands of miles, straight through the warship, and extended thousands of miles into the abyss in the distance. Then, a terrifying light burst out from the thin bolt of lightning, rapidly expanding and swallowing everything along the way, leaving a lingering afterimage in everyone's eyes. Under this attack, the transit station of the Bivrost at the border had been completely destroyed. Even though the backup warship was quickly rising, there was still a short gap in the battlefield support. Finally, he turned back and looked in the direction of Osiris. In an instant, countless ear-piercing alarms sounded. Huaishir was horrified. It was the first time he felt such a strong aura of death. Even through Osiris armor, he still shuddered. He saw the old man slowly raise his eyes. The white of his eyes and pupils could not be seen. There was only the raging lightning of the abyss. When Huaishir looked at him, he was also looking at Huaishir. The old man raised one hand and formed a seal in front of his eyes, his lips moving silently. "Moo!" Huaisher's vision turned black. It felt as if a bolt of lightning had been forcefully stuffed into his brain. Through the judgment suit, the king of the outer Tao's divine power was exerted on Huaisher's soul without any hindrance, causing his consciousness to instantly collapse and his soul to suffer heavy damage. In a daze, he spat out large mouthfuls of blood. The ear-piercing alarm sounded. Osiris fell on his back. The king of the outer Tao stepped forward expressionlessly, ready to completely eliminate all future troubles. But he heard Mather's voice behind him. It's just a clown. It doesn't matter if we leave him alone. Besides, we have to make Orton leave something behind. The king of the outer Tao indifferently retracted his gaze. Then let's go. The skinny old man waved his hand. You have wasted too much time. Accompanied by his words, a light that looked like a stairway to heaven flew down from the land of dreams and shrouded the astral. It locked the crystal cage together with the surviving evildoers and the dying, decaying dream. It pulled them up and began to rise rapidly. Pack them up and take them away. At the same time, a white pigeon seemed to have lost its way and scuttled into the center of the battlefield. Chapter 433. Between the turbulent sea and the sky, the white dove looked around blankly and flapped its wings. Then it flew around the huge beam of light, as if it finally remembered where its home was, and flapped its wings and flew away. It was so fast and so sudden. There was no telling where it came from and where it disappeared to. It was as fast as lightning. What was even faster than lightning was a line of iron light that came roaring from behind. The divine mark that was condensed to the limits circled around the gravitational rope of the land of dreams and disappeared. Then, the beam of light was cut in half, like a glass column that was cut by a high-pressure water knife. It was as smooth as a mirror. Light in the physical sense was easily cut, and whether it was a wave or a particle, it was unquestionably divided into two. Even the gravitational force and restraint imposed on it collapsed along with it. The rainbow light descended from the sky again. An old man in a robe walked out from it, opened the sealed box in his hand, and held it high. The world tilted. Everything began to tilt toward a subtle angle, spinning violently up, down, front, back, left, and right were quickly reversed and reorganized, forming an invisible maze. The ladder to heaven fell again, but it could not crack the random password and return without success. Now, the endless sea was shrouded in the framework of the triple law. The double helix secret instrument gave all abyssal creatures a 25% boost and all non-hell creatures a 25% suppression. After the primordial soup forcibly smoothed everything out, it gave all non-single-celled and non-mechanical creatures that entered the field a 30% weakening and a field of continuous decomposition that targeted cells. All creatures that entered the field had to endure the destruction of their own cells like radiation. And the framework on top of that, the box court therapy instantly turned the entire sea into a sandbox, breaking it down into hundreds of modules, each of which could be flipped at will, forming an ever-changing spatial maze. Following that, a sharp ray of light shot out from the land of dreams and descended from the sky. King's Selection Sword. The spatial seal of the box court was completely penetrated by the sword. The moment the ancient longsword was nailed into the Stellaris, all creatures that did not possess the status of swarm leader, crowned, or ruler were forcibly repelled. The deeper they went, the more they would feel the terrifying gravitational force. They would be quickly consumed in the dilemma and die from exhaustion. Then, the special envoy from the Directorate of Defense opened the door of the storage room and poured a spoonful of boiling oil on the globe, using 3 times the amount he had just used. Tribulation fire descended from the sky. Another ray of light was cast from the land of dreams. The reversal framework that operated against entropy and the paradox theory revealed itself once more, subverting the heat, turning it into frost, and then casually turning the frost back into flames. Under the interference of temporal tailoring, the complex and exquisite transformations were completed. In the end, the two sides canceled each other out in balance, turning into a meaningless storm that blew in all directions. The theorem framework, eternal world, descended here, turning it into a kingdom of the undead. Then a Tier 5 ascendant from the Russian Federation raised the Holy Grail and set off on a warhorse, galloping through the waves. Holy radiance fell, purifying all the hidden death poison. Bright light appeared out of thin air, illuminating the sea once more. When the area was no longer limited to a single area, a total of 11 creators from both sides superimposed various messy frameworks on the sea, causing the style and laws of the area to change wildly. Countless physical collision effects that only existed in trashy game engines kept appearing here. The scene was completely chaotic. It was as if 3 liters of water were boiled in a pot for 5 minutes. Then star anise, fennel, rice, red dates, military models, soldiers, blood clots, pig intestines, seasoned wine, squid, stinky dog excrement, rainbow candy, and a bunch of other things were added to the pot and simmered for 10 minutes. Amidst the violent tremors, Osiris was affected by the aftermath and flew like a rag doll, falling into the endless sea and gradually sinking into the depths. Ear-piercing alarms continued to ring. Huaisher could only see darkness. He panted violently, but he could not support his body. He opened his mouth, but could not make a sound, as if he had become mentally retarded. Instincts, muscle memory, memories, self-awareness, and even consciousness were all messed up by the eye of lightning. Just a little bit more, and he would become a vegetable. Detected pilots, abnormal condition. Switching driving mode. Retreat route planned. Self-disciplined artificial intelligence. Lord of the Flies online. In the cockpit, the Book of Steel slowly rose and locked onto it. Beelzebub's projection appeared, reaching out to take over Huaisher's control rights. However, a raised hand held it tightly. Nobody can stop me from driving the robot. In his dizziness, Hillghost raised his head, green flames shooting out his eyes. Nobody. In his other hand, the Book of Destiny appeared, instantly reorganizing all his consciousness. It was neat and tidy, as if everything just now, except for the blood in his mouth and nose, was an illusion. No, Huaisher. Beelzebub was silent for a long time. Whether it's you or this armor, we can't continue like this. Let's go. We're already here. It's the new year. You're still a kid. What nonsense are you talking about? Huaisher glared at him. You're only a little bit away from that bastard Mathers. Hurry up and take out whatever treasures you have. Stop hiding them. As you wish. After a moment of silence, Beelzebub suddenly sighed. Suddenly, a joystick popped out of the cockpit. Do you see this? Press the red button and pull to the end. Without thinking, Huaisher reached out and pressed the joystick. The moment the red button was pressed, an ear-piercing alarm sounded in the cockpit. As the joystick was pulled down, silence filled the cockpit. On the cover of the Book of Steel, countless words flashed across the projection. In the end, they were replaced by a line of blood-red words. Nether River has finished warming up. Countdown 3, 2, 1. In the dead silence, the sound of a flood suddenly burst out. Huaisher was instantly swallowed by countless gloomy auras. He was frozen stiff and could not even move his consciousness. Endless deaths turned into records and continuously surged into his consciousness, pulling him closer and closer to that irreversible boundary again and again. Gray water vapor condensed in the air and turned into a storm, drowning the entire cockpit in an instant. Everything sank to the bottom of the Nether River. At that moment, Osiris's eyes suddenly dimmed. There were no more reactions. But then, the countless armor all over his body opened with a roar, spewing out terrifying heat and flames. Intense light emerged from the Nether River. It shot out from Osiris's eyes like the sun in the darkness. Oh. Huaisher felt himself burning. Imitating the miracle of Osiris's return from death twice, this huge mecha turned into a coffin of death that carried the god and floated on the Nether River. It activated all the engines and source furnaces and carried out the forbidden miracle. In the end, it could draw closer to the power of God without any restrictions. Layers of shackles were instantly removed. The armor kept falling off and falling apart. It was as if a person wearing heavy armor had removed all the shackles that hindered him and stepped onto the final battlefield. Flames shot out from the gaps in the steel mechanism. At this moment, everyone saw light and heat suddenly erupting from the endless sea. It was as if a sun was rapidly rising from the bottom of the sea. No, it was the great star in the nether river that had descended here. It was an existence that shook the heavens and the earth, operating endless great power. The giant of the underworld tore apart the undercurrent of the sea and rose into the sky. It stood between the abyss and the sea and roared loudly. Full health, resurrection. Huaishir cheered in ecstasy. As expected of me, that curry old man is here again, Beelzebub reminded. Be careful. In front of the crystal cage, the heretic king coldly looked at the sublimators who were besieging him. He raised the 5 fingers of one of his hands, and with a flick of his fingers, lightning bolts filled the sky. Meanwhile, he raised his other hand unhurriedly and aimed it at Osiris, who had returned to seek his own death, and indifferently chanted a few syllables. Endless darkness appeared out of nowhere. Like a huge mouth, it swallowed Osiris. Subconsciously, Huaishir took a step back without hesitation. He actually retreated 16 kilometers in the air without any warning, leaving only a straight trail of light. Even Beelzebub was stunned. What's this? He asked in shock. What's this thing? You. Boo. Huaishir was dumbfounded. Only now did he realize that after getting rid of all the armor, Osiris's alloy muscles actually perfectly simulated his movements and reactions. He was pleasantly surprised. Mechas know ancient martial arts. Even gods can't stop them. You know that. He shouted excitedly. We're in the bag now. The shepherd's staff unfolded again. It rose hundreds of meters in the air again. The giant of the underworld swooped down with blazing flames. In the battle, the heretic king looked back indifferently. He did not look at Osiris. Instead, he stared at the trail of light that was quickly disappearing in the air. A hint of shock flashed through his turbid black eyes. Then, undisguised disgust and murderous intent appeared. Such a stance is truly unpleasant. As if recalling something annoying, the heretic king bent his finger and flicked it. A streak of lightning exploded and turned into a thunderstorm, whizzing toward him. Huaishir roared angrily. He swept the shepherd's staff and shattered the sweeping lightning. The giant of the underworld fell from the sky like an ominous star. The golden star fell toward the sea, carrying with it a violent and heavy pressure. The shepherd's staff slashed. The heretic king raised his fist and punched upward without even looking back. An earth-shaking boom burst forth. Cracks appeared on the shepherd's staff, and in an instant, it fell apart. Huaishir widened his eyes in shock. Then he saw the old man raise his gloomy eyes and glance at him from among the countless flying fragments. He clenched his fist and punched again with endless lightning wrapped around it. This time it was a straight punch. Chapter 434. It was a merciless, full-powered attack. A hurricane erupted, and thousands of lightning bolts shot out from his black fist. They instantly extended thousands of miles, cutting the eternal darkness in the abyss apart. Osiris was sent flying backward. He was pushed from one end of the astral to the other. After leaving behind 2 deep and tragic ravines, the crocodile shield in front of him was burned red and quickly cracked. 2 red-hot arms were exposed. They were trembling slightly. How could this old man be so strong? Huaishir's hair stood on end. What made him even more incredulous was that this guy's move seemed to be a drummer. Even though it was completely different from what Elder Luo had taught him, it was the same thing in his bones. The only difference was that one used the origin substance of the Ascended Realm, while the other used the origin substance of the Ascended Realm to replace the origin substance with the more destructive lightning. Careful! It's coming again. Under the siege of Sur-Tur, the Holy Grail Knight, and several other sublimators, the heretic king, who was fighting 1 against 4, found some time to punch a Huaisher from afar. 6 kilometers away, Huaisher already felt the pain of his skull being crushed and his body being run over by a truck. But this time, his dodging movement suddenly slowed down. The sharp sound of the power alarm came from the cabin. There was no power. What the hell? Huaisher couldn't believe it. You can't be so weak, right? No, even Ultraman can last 3 minutes. How come you can't even last 3 minutes? You didn't even give Osiris a full charge. Beelzebub was in despair. Brother, you're already thanking the heavens for taking so long with only 10% of power. Lightning and a hurricane rushed toward them like a flood. Huaisher sucked in a cold breath. This time, I'm really King dead. At that moment, the rainbow light fell from the sky again. It wrapped around the huge object and smashed into the astral, blocking the lightning like a fortress. The outermost ivory tower emblem was instantly burned to ashes. Then, the terrifying sharp blade hidden inside was revealed. He didn't know whether it should be called a giant cannon or a heavy sword, but the moment the sharp edge of the rainbow gold blade was revealed, it emitted a cold light. He allowed the lightning storm to engulf him, but he was not damaged in the slightest. In addition to the sharp edges on both sides of the blade, countless solemn cuneiform characters were shining on the huge and heavy blade, praising the coming destruction and judgment. Eternal darkness brewed in the pitch-black barrel of the cannon, bringing about an incomparable sense of existence. Supreme Adjudicator armaments, blades of Osiris in position. A low voice sounded in Osiris's cockpit, causing Huaisher to fall into a state of shock. He subconsciously reached out his hand. The spouts on the 16 blades released sparks like rocket propellers, propelling the huge sword cannon forward. It landed in Huaisher's hands, fitting seamlessly. Immediately after, in the distance, the Rainbow Bridge's rainbow light flashed once again. A torrent of dazzling silver light descended from the sky. The origin substance interface from the Astronomy Association was fully opened to this unknown armor. The energy supply began. In the blink of an eye, the portion of energy that had been depleted began to rapidly increase. 20%, 60%, 80%. In the blink of an eye, 100%. Finally, a message appeared on the screen in the cockpit. Greetings to you, the unknown pilot of Osiris. I sincerely offer you this insignificant help. I hope that Lord Orton's brilliant dream has not been wiped out. The ivory tower. When Huaisher turned around, he saw that in the distant sky, the vice principal from the ivory tower was holding his chest and nodding. His originally gloomy face was filled with solemnity as he paid his respects to the predecessors of the previous generation. Did you see that, Beelzebub? Huaisher could not help but chuckle softly. Orton has not been forgotten. His sacrifice and death were not in vain. Apart from you, he still left his mark in this world, a legend that cannot be forgotten. Orton, separated by the cage of the double helix secret instrument, Mather's expression gradually darkened the moment he saw the sword cannon descending from the sky. Why is it still so upsetting even after he has been dead for so many years? Heretic King, he raised his voice. This is no longer within the scope of a child's prank. Kill him. The skinny old man was speechless. Blazing lightning shot out from his eyes. The 16 layers of pitch-black light on his back suddenly activated. If the previous Osiris, who was regarded as the Lord of the Flies, was still within the tolerance limit of their past relationship, then the giant of the underworld, who was now equipped with the supreme judgment, was definitely a hidden danger. It must be eradicated. Faster than him, the sword cannon burst forth with a roar. At the end of the great sword, a huge spout shot out a blazing light. After locking onto the armor, a terrifying force was shot out, pushing the giant of the underworld forward. In an instant, the long distance of 6 kilometers was covered in a flash. The rainbow gold sword had already slashed down. It was facing the iron fist that was overflowing with lightning. Amidst the roar, the sword roared, and a huge wave spread out in all directions. This time, the huge armor stood firm and did not move or retreat. The weapon in its hand, which could be called a sword, an axe, or a cannon, suddenly swept out. Bang! The heretic king raised his arm, and his iron-green skin blocked the front of the sword cannon. The high-frequency vibration of the sword blade cut through his skin, leaving a wound. Immediately after, his left foot stomped on the ground, causing the huge MV Stellaris to emit a mournful cry, and suddenly sank more than 2 meters. A huge force flowed through his body, and under the swing of his arm, gathered on the iron fist and slashed forward. Huaishir heard a cracking sound coming from his arm. Bone cracking. Immediately after, a Vajra pestle the length of a forearm suddenly appeared in the skinny old man's hand. He raised it high, and light surged, turning his entire arm into pure gold. Smash! A huge uproar burst forth. In an instant, the few ascendants who were pouncing on him were forced to retreat. The old man waved his hand expressionlessly, and a solidified thunderbolt rose from the Vajra pestle, turning into a torrent that circled around his body like a huge snake. The pitch-black light suddenly grew. The thunderbolt snake opened its mouth, hissed, and flew straight towards Osiris. Where did this dog come from? Get lost. Beelzebub snorted coldly. Immediately after, Huaishir felt the sword cannon in his hand tremble violently. The handle quickly extended, and the originally heavy sword moved along with the module, turning into a huge axe. Without any hesitation, Huaishir raised her hand, turned around, and swung the giant axe in her hand. After drawing a sharp arc in the air, she slashed forward. The arc of the rainbow gold flashed, and the thunderbolt snake's hissing instantly became tragic. One of its heads was chopped into 2, from the middle all the way to the end. In the dissipating lightning, the heretic king's body suddenly leaped up. Stepping on the falling axe, he ran towards Osiris and punched. Osiris also raised his hand and clenched it tightly. Fist against fist. Terrifying shock waves burst forth the moment the iron fists collided. Cracks spread out from Osiris's iron fists, but they were immediately healed by the flames. He blocked it. Huaishir was pleasantly surprised. Then he heard the sound of the crystal cage breaking. In the cage, Mathers had already disappeared without a trace. Only the blood-red giant tree broke out of the cage. The baby's cries had already turned into hoarse laughter. The sharp roots swept towards Osiris. Countless twin spiral crystals extended from the roots. In the blink of an eye, Osiris was pushed back several kilometers. In the end, you're still too slow, Lord of the Flies. Mather's voice sounded mockingly. The roots of the giant tree wrapped around the decaying dream's broken body and slowly rose towards the sky. Above the tree crown, countless blood-red crystals grew out. Like fruits, they hung down heavily from the branches. One of them fell gently. In an instant, violent blood-red light turned into a tide, spreading in all directions. It swallowed everything. All the shackles set by the astronomy club instantly fell apart. In the abyss, the land of dreams once again projected dozens of light figures. They descended, and the 16 ladders pulled them up rapidly. The phantom of the white dove appeared again. But this time, as soon as the divine Mark's metallic light appeared, the heretic king, who had been prepared for this, threw out a punch. The terrifying lightning that gathered all the light and heat in the 3 realms collided with the divine Mark, destroying each other. From the beginning until now, he had been holding back more than 40% of his strength to guard against this elusive iron light. Finally, I'll leave you with a memorable lesson, Lord of the Flies. Among the countless roots, a pitch-black and straight root instantly fell off. 4 twin spiral crystals were wrapped around it, forming a terrifying spear that was thrown towards Osiris. This is a matter between adults. Children shouldn't interfere. In an instant, a premonition of death descended from the sky. Huaishir retreated without hesitation, but the spear woven from the roots and crystals was too fast. Before he could react, it had already pierced through Osiris' body. The giant of the underworld was hung on the spear, severely injuring him. Huaishir originally thought that such a terrifying attack would instantly kill him, but when he reacted, he found that he had not been hit at all. Instead, the book of steel slowly rose in front of him. A deep crack appeared on the huge module, and countless drops of ink flowed out from it like blood. Beelzebub. Huaishir was stunned. Hello, what happened to you? Are you still alive? Shut up. You're so annoying. Beelzebub yelled angrily. You have to shout twice just because I bumped into you. Am I a kindergarten kid? He was simply returning the words back to him. Kids are the ones who learn how to speak. Don't worry so much. Huaishir, we don't have time. Beelzebub was silent for a while. Then, he suddenly said, We're already here, right? We have to finish what we started. In the silence, Huaishir took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He said, Okay. Orange reaction detected. Radar scan complete. Identifying the remnant. Sixth furnace unlocked. Authorization approved. At that moment, a line of dazzling red words rose from the screen and appeared in front of Huaishir. Do you want to activate the resurrection mechanism? Yes, no. Huaishir reached out his hand and tapped it. Thank you. Huaishir, Beelzebub whispered softly. Beelzebub murmured softly, full of gratitude and gratitude. Then, a roar from a mansion of the dead resounded throughout the world. As the last piece of heavy armor completely shattered, a terrifying light turned into a tide and burst out of Osiris's body, illuminating this dark world. The forbidden sequence that reversed life and death had been activated. In an instant, the root spear was incinerated in the light. With a huge hole in his chest, the broken armor defied gravity and slowly rose from the constellation. Thousands of torrents of light extended from his back like thousands of blazing wings. But the wings did not spread. That was because the thousands of torrents of light quickly extended and wrapped around Osiris's body. Layer after layer of light enveloped him in an instant. Overlimit mode activated. Osiris expanded again and roared. Through the binding of light, he roared furiously at hell. When the countless rays of light dissipated, the giant of the dead that was shrouded in them had transformed into a completely different appearance. He wore a sacred white crown on his head and a solemn long robe on his body. An awe-inspiring aura radiated in all directions, forming a huge light wheel behind him. It was as if a real god had descended into this world. After being reborn from death, the master of the underworld returned to this world. He raised his eyes that were filled with hatred and stared at Golden Dawn, who was fighting with the powerful enemy of the Astronomy Society in the abyss. Then, miracle engraving R.A. Stau opened. Behind Osiris, the light wheel spun wildly. From the center, a crack opened and slowly expanded, turning into a crack that led to somewhere. In the legends, it was the passage that all dead souls used to enter the underworld. But at this moment, this path of nothingness did not lead to the underworld. Instead, it led to a place that was even more deathly silent than the underworld and closer to the deepest part of hell than hell, an invisible, boundless, and deep crevice that was eternally dark. It was like the primordial moment between the creation of the world, where all things were chaotic in the void. Then in Huaishir's hands, the huge sword cannon began to vibrate violently. The blade of the sword quickly moved to both sides, and the cannon began to extend wildly. In an instant, it reached a height of 1,000 meters. In Osiris's hands, it was aimed diagonally at the huge, upside-down tree that was entangled in the abyss and unable to escape. Target aiming complete. Warm-up preparation. Cause and effect locking complete. Eliminate original sin, create paradise, and forever separate hell. The ideal country will be created from this. Osiris chanted solemnly, and his solemn voice announced to all existences between heaven and earth, with this attack, I will establish the foundation of forever without home. In an instant, Marth's expression suddenly changed. He showed a trace of rage. Lord of the Flies, please call me Beelzebub. Thank you. Osiris responded indifferently. Behind him, the darkness in the crevice suddenly boiled, and endless darkness surged rapidly. It was the primordial matter that had existed long before the creation of heaven and earth. It was also a terrifying power that could only be created and preserved at the bottom of the underworld and the source of the Styx River. It was the opposite of everything that was. It was pure nothing. The primordial matter that had created everything turned into a torrent and continuously poured into the sword cannon. It rapidly decayed, split, and created something out of nothing. In this narrow furnace, the calamity of the creation of heaven and earth and the creation of all things was repeated. Existence and nothingness, birth and death and life were integrated into one by this chaos, turning into an indescribable sharp light. "Take it, Marth." In the intense light, Beelzebub announced solemnly, "This is the response after 70 years. This is the last word that Orton left for you rebels, you fallen ones." He said, "From now on, we are no longer partners." In that instant, Hweischer pulled the trigger. The lightning of creation and destruction turned into supreme judgment and surged out of the furnace, tearing apart the abyss in front of them inch by inch. It easily shattered the heretic king's lightning. It tore apart the defense of the double helix secret will and pierced through it, piercing into the body of the surviving evil. Like tearing apart a thin piece of paper, it tore it into two in a rage. At this moment, heaven and earth were silent, and all things were dim. Everything lost its color under this solemn judgment. In the abyss, countless dark silhouettes were burned into nothingness by this intense light. In the land of dreams, a silhouette raised his hand and blocked the stream of light. But in an instant, the primordial light tore his hand apart, leaving a deep mark on the huge hell. Terrifying explosions kept rising from behind the mark, illuminating the entire abyss. That person retracted his hand in shock and looked at the burn marks on his hand. There was also a burning pain on his face. It was like a slap in the face after so many years. It was so sudden. It was so heart-wrenching. Chapter 435. The world fell into a dead silence in an instant. Only the tragic cries of the giant upside-down tree could be heard, and huge scars could be seen. He was burning, being locked onto by Osiris, and receiving the first judgment was like receiving the tyrannical power of the rebooting of the universe. It was the primordial chaos, the essence of the primordial. Even if it was only a wisp, it was enough to cause a terrifying chain reaction, reproducing the terrifying light of the creation and destruction of the world. Because of this, it was called the supreme judgment. Before this judgment, all things were equal. Even if it was a surviving evil, it was still broken and completely torn in two. It was unknown how many lords of the abyss were annihilated in the aftermath of his attack. Even if it passed through many obstacles, it still left deep wounds and destruction on the land of dreams. Immediately afterward, the light of the rainbow bridge whizzed over and collided with the power of the land of dreams. Seizing this short gap, it mercilessly attacked with all its strength. The two sides collided with each other, setting off a mighty tide in the abyss. For a time, countless figures appeared, wanting to fish in troubled waters. Amidst the continuous roars and explosions, countless figures crossed each other before dispersing in an uproar. The rainbow bridge surged and rolled up most of the surviving evil's body, along with the remains of the Queen of Rotten Dreams. It was forcefully pulled out of the stairway to heaven, violently pulled down, sealed, and quickly disappeared. Immediately afterward, it returned, pulled out the ruling authority of the mirror realm from the body of the surviving evil, and left. During this process, the shadow of a white dove flashed by, knocking away a golden figure with a pair of wings on its back. It rolled up the head of the Queen of Rotten Dreams and also disappeared into the void. At the same time, a strange mouse drilled out of a big hole in the sky, pulled out a root of the surviving evil, turned around, and ran away. It was as if 100,000 people had suddenly jumped out to loot a burning house. More than half of the fruits of the Golden Dawn's labor that had been planned for a long time were taken away in an instant. Only a small part of the stairway to heaven's body was left behind, preserving Mather's last breath. The flames spread and quickly extinguished. Soon, the land of dreams got rid of the entanglement of the deep sky fleet and quietly disappeared into the abyss. The harvesting plan that had been planned for a long time was destroyed by a report letter from a newbie astronomy club. How pitiful! In the cockpit, Fleischer could not help but shake his head and sigh. Beelzebub did not say anything. He just chuckled softly. In the silence, Fleischer heard the sound of Osiris cracking, and his expression stiffened. The last bit of hope in his heart gradually dissipated. "Why are you so sad, Fleischer?" In the projection, Beelzebub smiled. "Isn't this the best ending?" Golden Dawn had failed, and the Astronomy Society had won another victory. As for me, I fulfilled my wish and barely managed to avenge Orton. Is there anything else to regret? Yes, it couldn't be more perfect. Fleischer leaned against the chair tiredly and no longer had the strength to move. He felt a splitting headache. "If I had known, I wouldn't have persuaded you." Ha! Why did I have so many expectations for a book? Beelzebub faced his ending calmly. Ralph is already dead. Fleischer, Lord of the Flies, should have ended long ago. "It's good to end here," Beelzebub said. "This is enough, my friend," he said. He smiled and gazed at Fleischer and told him, "It's good to know you." "Me too." Fleischer closed his eyes and said goodbye softly. After a long, long time, in a long silence, Beelzebub suddenly asked, "So, does your family really have 1,000 megabytes of fiber at the border? How's the salary? Do you have insurance and a double salary at the end of the year?" "Huh?" Fleischer opened his eyes in shock. Looking at the book of steel that had shrunk a lot, he felt that something was wrong. "Why are you looking at me as if I'm still alive?" Beelzebub asked in confusion. Suddenly, he realized something. "Hey, did you think I was going to die? You put so many flags here and blamed me for thinking you were going to die. What do you think?" Fleischer was furious. He pulled out his sacrificial knife and pointed it at the cover of Lord of the Flies. "You wasted so much of my feelings, and you dare to blame me? I'll send you to hell now." "Brother, don't. I was just adding to the atmosphere. Don't you think that the lines just now were very cool? I thought about it for a long time." Beelzebub shouted in embarrassment. "I'm injured. I'm really injured. Seriously injured. Look, my stitches are coming off. Be gentle. There's more. There's something very important." "What?" Fleischer was also stunned. He felt that he had really forgotten something very important. "To be honest, I activated the self-destruct mode just now and overloaded it," Beelzebub said awkwardly. "But I think I removed the emergency ejection device and the escape pod." "So?" Fleischer looked at the half-minute countdown on the screen and felt his scalp tingle. "So why are you still standing there? Run!" Beelzebub screamed. "Osiris is going to explode." Soon, as the land of dreams disappeared, Osiris, which was bathed in flames, gradually collapsed and dimmed. Finally, it exploded on the endless ocean. Countless corpses collapsed and fell into the endless ocean, disappearing without a trace. In the ocean, Fleischer struggled to get up. He stuck his head out and climbed onto the remains of Stellaris with difficulty. Looking back, he saw how Osiris had exploded and sunk. Tears welled up in his eyes. My mecha sank after just one activation. He beat his chest and stomped his feet. "My heart hurts." The book of steel in his arms comforted him. "Don't be sad. I put away all the core components of Osiris. When we earn money in the future, we can buy them back." "How much does it cost?" Beelzebub thought awkwardly for a moment. "Don't worry. Not counting the other components and upgrade procedures, the main body is quite cheap. About 80 billion, it thought for a while, and added USD. Fleischer blacked out. It was as if he saw his savings fly out of his pocket with wings. Yes, after saving for a lifetime, he would order a birthday cake in his old age and celebrate that he could finally afford to buy Osiris's heel. It was scary to think about that future. Forget it. I'm so poor that I can just play a few games to satisfy my craving. I shouldn't think about the peaches for no reason. But speaking of which, there's still good news. Before Beelzebub could finish, Fleischer heard horse laughter behind him. It was so crazy. When Fleischer turned around, he saw that in the burning remains of Stellaris, the broken carriage was slowly pushed open. A charred and broken figure climbed out. He was panting heavily. He was heavily injured, but he was not dead yet. After going through so much, he escaped from the rotten dream and avoided the terrifying war that followed. He struggled to survive under the feet of the giants. Finally, he escaped with his life. Ha ha ha, I'm still alive, I'm still alive. Mirando laughed wildly at the sky and danced in excitement. When he saw Huaishur not far away, his smile became even more joyful. It was extremely ferocious. Licking his dry and broken lips, he grinned, revealing his sharp teeth. Ah, we meet again. Huaishur froze for a long time. He looked at him, then lowered his head and looked at Beelzebub's unfinished good news. In his hand, the book of steel quickly changed. Countless modules rose and fell. In the end, it became a heavy revolver. The relief of the crocodile-headed god on the handle quietly turned into the appearance of Lord of the Flies. Opening the cartridge, he saw 6 emerald-green bullets sleeping inside, waiting for Huaishur's summon. Thus, Mirando's smile froze. His face was clearly charred, but it felt like he was gradually turning pale. Oh, what's that saying again? Huaishur smiled and tilted his head to ask Beelzebub, who had turned into a revolver. Thus, the relief of Lord of the Flies on the handle also seemed to smile. Of course, there's a beginning and an end. Mirando instinctively took a step back. Wait, he retreated in panic, wanting to explain. I think this is a misunderstanding. His eyes wandered as he stepped back step by step. Mr. Mirando. Huaishur studied his appearance and suddenly asked, a long time ago, those priests who preached would say that humans once lived in a beautiful heaven and followed God's orders, living a carefree life. However, they were not allowed to eat fruits from trees. Do you know why? Such a familiar question. He seemed to have heard it somewhere before, but Mirando could not remember where. However, with the gun aimed at him, he could not remain silent. Feeling uneasy, he answered tentatively, because those who eat will have original sin. Wrong. Huaishur shook his head regretfully and pulled the trigger. Of course, it's because there's no good fruit for you to eat here. Amidst the smoke, the messenger from Lighthouse delivered the latest analysis results. The ivory tower has proven that the unknown armor is Osiris, who was once built by celestial genealogy. The ascendant of Utopia. No, our commissioner has confirmed the engravings on the boundary stone. The former inquisitor of the underworld, Orton, did indeed pass away when the heaven fell 70 years ago. However, the ivory tower said that the recorded body he contracted did not return. If a new ascendant inherits Orton's will, there's a high possibility that he will become Osiris Pilot. It's not easy to accomplish such a feat with a broken armor. It's a pity that Osiris has been destroyed. Someone sighed. Do you have any idea about the pilot's identity? According to the comparison of intelligence from the Directorate, Lighthouse provided a preliminary analysis. The messenger was silent for a moment and placed a photo on the table. We have reason to believe that Osiris Pilot is this inspector who was left behind on the Stellaris due to an accident. In the photo, the young man stared blankly in the direction of the camera. Sheriff of Xinhai, Huaishur, male. A long row of exaggerated resumes instantly filled the projection screen. Second-order ascendant of celestial genealogy, mountain ghost, nemesis of the green sun, calamity musician, abyss cooking demon, legendary investigator, prince of paradise, third place of Asian rising talent competition, anointed of the witch's night, registered military officer with an internal evaluation of class before he could even react. A bunch of titles and merits were piled up on the table, making a loud and clear sound. Just by looking at the dazzling achievements, their minds could outline a perfect template of a person who abhorred evil, was smart and capable, had a noble character, and had a strong personality. Most importantly, only 17 years old? The silence was sudden. The old people who were used to seeing storms and waves were drinking tea, but the commissioners from all over could not help but look at each other. They felt that something was not right. Are you sure? Someone began to doubt. He's still too young. Do we need to observe him for a while? After a moment of silence, the messenger from the lighthouse picked up the remote control. He should still be at the scene. We have just connected to the surveillance on the Stellaris. We can take a look at the specific situation first. The various reports on the big screen quickly moved away, and the images from the remaining surveillance on the Stellaris kept appearing. In less than a second, the terminal had already detected Huaishi's location. The irrelevant images quickly shrank, and only a few shots of the scene were zoomed in. The first thing they heard was the sound of a gunshot, followed by a scream. Then they saw the broken figure rolling on the ground, and the cold figure standing beside it, holding a gun and looking down. This atmosphere, no matter how they looked at it, did not feel right. It was as if they were witnessing the scene of a murder. They watched as the murderer carried a hammer and coldly broke the victim's limbs, leaving him to wail tragically. Finally, the murderer violently pulled the victim's hair and pressed the red-hot muzzle against his forehead. There was a sizzling sound. "Wait a minute, I surrender. Don't kill me. Wait a minute." Mirando screamed. His pupils kept turning and trembling. "It's better to be alive than dead, right? You must be from the Astronomy Society, right? Spare my life. I know a lot of secrets, a lot of people's secrets. Not only Rotten Dream, but also several churches of the Rancher. I know where all of them are. Also, Dracula's miracle mark, his formula. I can give them all to you." In the silence, there seemed to be some movement. Huaishi was silent, as if he was thinking. The muzzle of the gun was raised, lowered, raised, and lowered again. He was hesitant. Soon, the identity of the victim was marked on the screen. Next to it was a photo and a wanted notice from the Bureau. "Haha, young man, you're quite lucky." The person in charge of the L4 building raised his eyebrows. "Looks like we've caught a big fish. Young people are still too inexperienced. Arrange for the transfer of manpower." The man smoking said cautiously, "If Mirando escapes, I'm afraid we'll have to spend a lot more effort." "Didn't you say to observe? I think this is a good opportunity." Another person calmly suggested, "Rotten Dream has already been taken in by the Continuation Academy. A single officiant won't be able to make any waves." After Rotten Dream had been completely overturned, a mere finite society was nothing to the Bureau. It wasn't worth mentioning at all. What they were curious about at the moment was how the young man in front of them would make his choice. Would he carefully kill the enemy without leaving any hidden dangers? Or would he violently blast this long-winded fellow to smithereens? Or would he spare his life like a cat playing with a mouse, casually extinguishing all possibilities of escape? Or, if he was careless, the enemy would escape. No matter what choice he made, they would be able to see something. Or perhaps they wanted to know, what exactly was he hesitating about? In the silence, there was only the sound of the wreckage of the Stellaris burning. Sweat dripped down from Mirando's forehead drop by drop. He carefully raised his eyes and peeked at Huaishi's expression. In the flickering light of the fire, the shadow of that face was constantly changing. It was difficult to see what he was thinking. Under the burn scar, the fascia of his right leg was slowly reconnecting. As long as he gathered some more strength, he would be able to break free from this rope and escape. However, he still couldn't find any opportunity under the aim of that pistol. "Hey, Huaishi," Beelzebub urged unhappily. "Why are you still dawdling? Do you really believe this guy's **T? "No, I just feel something doesn't seem right." Huaishi sighed. He squatted down and studied Mirando in front of him and the pistol in his hand. "It doesn't feel right. You know that, right?" The Lord of the Fly rolled his eyes. "You're just killing a piece of trash. Do you want to taste the taste of first love?" "No, I mean, didn't this guy just surrender to the Astronomy Society?" Huaishi raised his hand that was holding the gun and scratched his head. Then he put the gun down and pointed at Mirando's shocked face. Then I remembered. "Oh, I'm the only one left from the Astronomy Society. That means I'll be representing the Astronomy Society. I've already been paid so much. I can't tarnish the reputation of the organization. I have to think about it carefully, right?" And then, Beelzebub didn't even need to remind him. He had fully entered his role as the supporting actor. And then I remembered what was wrong. Huaishir slapped his thigh and exclaimed excitedly, "You really have to go through the process for this kind of thing." Just as Beelzebub and Mirando were stunned, Huaishir had already happily reached out and took out a book of rules for inspectors from his pocket. He flipped through the relevant procedures on the spot. Soon, the book was closed. "Okay, I know how to do it." Huaishir nodded confidently. He took out a pen and paper from his saddlebag and wrote an arrest warrant on the spot. He stamped it with the seal of the Shinhai inspector and showed Mirando the black letter that was still warm. Mirando M. Lando, you are suspected of endangering the current state, organizing an illegal church, murder, border smuggling, and other crimes. With the approval of the Astronomy Society's Shinhai branch, you are arrested today. Mirando was stunned for a moment. Then he was overjoyed and nodded crazily. "I'm willing to cooperate. I'm willing to confess. As long as you spare my life, very good." Huaishir interrupted him and announced according to the emergency procedure on the rules. "Then, you will be transferred to the border court for trial. As the only member of the Astronomy Society here, I will temporarily serve as the judge, deputy judge, and your prosecutor." He bent down and looked at Mirando's blank face. He smiled. "So, Defendant Mirando, you are convicted due to the conclusive evidence." Does the defendant's lawyer have any questions? There is no question. My client deserves it. Beelzebub raised his voice happily. He will definitely respect the verdict given by the jury. Very good. Huaishir took out a miniature version of the Hammer of Pain and knocked it on the broken carriage next to him. According to the temporary border court's verdict, Mirando, you are sentenced to death. You will be executed immediately, right now, right here. The second seal was stamped. Mirando's pupils dilated. He opened his mouth and wanted to shout, but Huaishir raised his hand and stuffed a handful of iron paste into his mouth. It stuck and quickly solidified. Only vague whimpers and roars were left. He struggled with all his might, but it was too late. The hell virus in his body was spreading rapidly, depriving him of his last strength. Amidst the burning flames, he looked up blankly. He saw the heavy steel behind the young man's back rapidly changing shape under the control of the young man's hand. It twisted and turned into a platform. Then, a ferocious frame quickly rose up. Under the suspension of the rope of sorrow, the heavy axe hung high, flashing with an angry cold light. "Finally, on behalf of the Astronomy Society, I will execute the verdict on you. This is how you will be executed in front of the guillotine." Huaishir opened his arms and happily announced to Mirando, "Behead! Woo-woo! Woo! Woo-woo-woo!" Under Huaishir's drag, Mirando tore his lips and screamed. He struggled with all his might, roaring and cursing, but he could not resist the hand that was holding him tightly. Inch by inch, he was dragged to the guillotine. Heavy shackles fell, choking his hands and neck, cutting off his last hope. "You won't have a good ending, you bastard. You're a lackey of the Astronomy Society." Mirando roared crazily, yelling with his big mouth that was pulled to his temples. "You will definitely fall into a situation thousands of times worse than mine. You will beg for death in the abyss. You will definitely, yes. Isn't this the fair trial you've been longing for, Mirando? Isn't this a judgment made in accordance with the laws, regulations, and even your wishes?" Huaishir tilted his head, squatted down, and stared into his eyes. As he spoke, there seemed to be endless phantoms appearing behind him, indifferently looking down at the sinner on the guillotine, judging this fair trial, watching the arrival of retribution. "I'm your arrestor. I'm your judge. I'm your executioner. Mirando, you can resent, but the result will not change." Huaishir raised his finger and snapped his fingers for the last time in front of him. "Please remember, my name is Huaishir." At that moment, the heavy axe hanging above the guillotine whistled down. There was a soft click. Justice, execution. The image ended there. In the decision-making room, after witnessing Huaishir's one-stop trial service, everyone's expressions became unusually interesting, not knowing how to judge. Ahem, although the process isn't very formal, it's an emergency. The person in charge of L4 on the overhead floor narrowed his eyes and seemed to smile. I think, at least there's no problem with the process. But these can all be solved through learning, right? Although the judgment is lacking in consideration, as a young man, it's already done very well. The representative from the border court took a sip of tea and said calmly, I think everything's good, but he's lacking a little experience. It just so happens that the border court is still lacking some newcomers. No, the process of his arrest is also a little informal. The person next to him raised his voice. He must come to us for training. If he doesn't get rid of his bad habits, there will be no end to the pernicious influence. I think it's necessary for him to learn more advanced methods of execution. Well, we can have an internal exchange. It'll only take 2 months. No, the format of his arrest notice format. The people in the secretariat subconsciously opened their mouths and wanted to pull him away, but after thinking for a long time, they found that there was no F*** problem with the format written by this little bastard, so they had no excuse to pull him away. Okay, don't quarrel. The middle-aged man at the head of the table raised his finger and knocked on the table. In the end, he's a rare and valuable talent. I believe everyone has seen his performance and conduct. As for observation and whatnot, forget about it. It's normal for young people to have some small secrets. We don't have the right to ask him to write all of it in his diary for us to see. After a pause, the middle-aged man continued. As for where he'll be transferred to, you can go down and discuss it yourselves. But it's best to see his personal development wishes. Didn't the personnel department ask him to fill in the form? The secretary was silent for a long time, and his face looked like he had eaten dog shit. He did. Okay. The middle-aged man picked up his teacup calmly. Where'd he fill in? Under everyone's focused gaze, the secretary picked up the form and read it with a numb face. Development expectations. Study hard, study hard. Then get admitted to the Vienna University of Music. Cough, cough. Become a useful cellist for the current situation. The middle-aged man's shoulders trembled. He held his breath and forced the tea in his mouth down. He looked up blankly. He said, cellist? Yes, cellist. The secretary repeated, get admitted to the Vienna University of Music and become a useful cellist for the current situation. Go to Vienna? Yes. The secretary nodded. Be a cellist? The middle-aged man's face looked like he was joking. He even reached out his hand and made a gesture of playing the cello. That's the violin. The person next to him corrected him. The cello is played in the arms. At this moment, everyone in the conference room suddenly had a fleeting feeling of unreality. This was definitely the first S-ranked military officer in the history of the Astronomy Society who said that he wanted to study hard and play the cello in the future. Wasn't an inspector who didn't want to be a headless demon a good cellist? Wasn't this world a little too fantastical? Oh, they look like they're having a lot of fun. At the round table, Crow looked at the scene not far away and sighed softly. At this moment, on the endless ocean, outside the Stellaris, half of a carriage that had been detached from the main body drifted alone on the sea. The light was warm. It was hard to believe that such a large half of a broken carriage could still travel on the sea. In the center of the carriage, within a 2-meter radius, there was not a trace of damage. It was like a miracle blessed by the god of luck. The terrifying turmoil and explosion didn't seem to have caused any damage to this place. Even when the carriage was lifted by the explosion not long ago and fell into the sea, the entire process was smooth and gentle. Even the steaming tea in the teacups didn't spill a single drop. The remaining part of the carriage happened to block the sea breeze and maintain a suitable temperature. Even a newspaper rack next to it wasn't wet by the turbulent seawater. Sitting next to the table, people suddenly felt a sense of tranquility. A man in a gray suit sat across from her. He nibbled on the overly sweet tea and frowned. There was too much honey and sugar. He simply couldn't finish it. He put down the biscuit in his hand, wiped his mouth, and drank the last of the tea in the cup. He sighed softly. Crow looked over and asked curiously, "Are you leaving?" "Yes, I've already done my duty." The man in gray rummaged through his pocket and took out a small bag. He put on the table. "This is for you. He should need it. The small transparent plastic bag contained a white bone object the size of a little finger. It looked like a chicken bone. The remains of an evil creature? Crow was surprised. Did you pull this out of the rotten dream specifically for him? It seems like you got along very well with my contractor. It's just a favor. Please don't mind it. The man in gray waved his hand embarrassedly. He stood up from the chair that was about to collapse, took down his coat and hat from the broken clothes rack, and finally picked up his briefcase from the floor that was beginning to leak water. He nodded to Crow and said goodbye. You still want to continue working? Crow said forget it. It's meaningless. But the work is there, isn't it? The man in gray shook his head helplessly. Someone has to do it. Otherwise, it will only increase. It's because of this that you're regarded as a destructive factor, a social animal that dies from overwork. Crow commented unhappily. When will this kind of meaningless work end? Until it's done? The man in gray laughed softly. His pale face was full of certainty. I believe that one day this world will no longer need a disaster warning like me. But before that, I have to clean up the mess left behind by the president. Isn't that what an assistant does? Up to you. Crow shook his head and sighed goodbye. No. The man in gray smiled shyly and waved his hand. I hope it's a farewell. His figure quietly dispersed in the darkness. Then, the remaining carriage began to slowly tilt, and with the waves, it sank into the sea together with the burning wreckage of the Stellaris in the distance. A black bird flapped its wings and flew up. On her head, there was a small and delicate crown. The authority of a ruler only appeared for a moment before it quickly disappeared. With the fall of the Queen of Rotten Dreams, the new ruler of the dream world spread her wings in the wind, happily humming a song, celebrating the harvest, and disappeared into the horizon. Chapter 436. Name. The next day, when Huaisher opened his eyes in the rescue team's hospital bed, he heard a voice close by. Then, he finally saw the black-hearted woman who had appeared out of nowhere. She was looking down at him with great interest. Yes, she even stepped on his face. Huaisher sighed. I say, before we go through the process, can you come down first? Wow, so cold? Crow tilted her head and looked at him. Is it because I don't give you enough benefits? Or are you used to seeing wildflowers outside, so you don't think this big sister is fragrant? Next time you say something like this, can you transform into a human first? Huaisher couldn't help but sneeze. He rubbed his nose and pulled her off his face. What do you want me to say? Damn you, you still know to come back? Or should I just throw you into the pot and make black chicken soup? The heavens took pity on me. At that time, I was going to take you and run away. Who knew you would be so stubborn and rush forward? Crow turned into mist and suddenly broke away from his hand. Then, she condensed on his hair and looked down at him. This time, it's purely because you're stubborn. You can't blame this big sister, right? Besides, is it not good to star mecha? You experienced the entire plot of a Shuang novel. Huaisher rolled his eyes. Is your definition of Shuang novel different from other people's? Okay, don't be angry. Kong Kong, what did Big Sister bring you? Crow raised a claw and grabbed a plastic bag, waving it in front of him. Chicken bones? Huaisher glanced at it. Did you bring back leftovers for me? Next time, can you bring a chicken rack? At least I can use it to make soup. Use the bones of the Queen of Rotten Dreams to make soup. Crow was stunned. Are you planning to embrace the abyss directly? Even if you're stubborn, you can't be so reckless, right? What the hell? Huaisher was stunned for a long time. He couldn't believe it. Wow, have you finally found your conscience? Crow shook his head and threw the bag into Huaisher's hands. Although your evaluation of me is quite biased, and I really want to say that Sister treats you so well, in fact, this is given to you by someone else who? Huaisher thought for a moment and reacted. A big shot in a gray suit? That fell off. More like a social animal. That's what he prepared for you. The remains of the vile creatures. The essence condensed from the lords of the swarm when they descended into physical form. It could be said that it is one of their essences. If it is used to make alchemy potions, I'm afraid it could be made into something quite incredible, and the dregs after that would be the ashes of the vile creatures you need for your ascension. Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air and could not help but click his tongue. Then he began to be afraid. On the one hand, he was shocked by the nature of the ashes of the vile creatures. On the other hand, he was shocked by the need for money to buy celestial genealogy. Even if it was the leftovers after the use, the bone dregs after the soup, it was still a part of the lords of hell, okay? If it was placed in other genealogies, it could be directly used as the material of the level 5 stigmata. But on the road of Heaven's Inquisition, it was only one of the level 3 materials? Wasn't it a bit too exaggerated? Don't get it wrong. How can the poor version and the luxurious version be the same? Crow had long been clear about Huaisher's stingy nature. He rolled his eyes. You want to become stronger, but you don't want to pay. Where are you from? Huaisher was too lazy to refute. Anyway, he finally understood why the celestial genealogy was called the Abyss genealogy. It was simply the hell of buying money. Don't ask so much, just buy it. If you buy it, you can become stronger. If you don't buy it, you will have nothing. It was simply bloody tears. Didn't he just experience it? Osiris, who had no equipment, was beaten by Golden Dawn. But with equipment in hand, he could immediately fight the vile creatures head-on. And Osiris, who was once in his heyday, entered hell with a full set of plus 19 god equipment. It was simply like beating up a child. But from his point of view, it was quite conscientious. After all, there are not many places where you could get what you paid for. But for most people, buying money was never a problem. The problem was that there was no money to buy. Even if Huaisher had just robbed a lot of money, he would feel a burst of despair when he thought about the next advancement materials. He was embarrassingly short of money. When would these days of hard labor come to an end? And the key was, how strong can I become if I buy this thing? Huaisher held the remains of the vile creatures in the bag, feeling a kind of happiness of 10 consecutive deliveries. It's over. He felt that he was hopeless. From the inside out, he had turned into the shape of a corium gold, so don't worry. The upgraded version will definitely have its benefits, Crow explained. According to my calculations, the upper limit of what you can bear now is about 1/3 of the body in the bag. Any more, and you will be corroded and solidified by the Abyss essence. The gains don't make up for the losses. Using the remains of the vile creatures to advance was considered the most extravagant, even in the utopia at that time. After you advance, the vitality and plague of the mountain ghost will be further improved. More importantly, the part of the Een soul will undergo a qualitative change. At that time, the black fog originally formed from the ashes will be directly given the aura of a ruler, forming a suppression on the enemy's level. Also, it can cause the Een soul's talent to undergo a qualitative change. You've struck gold. The Een soul's talent? Huaisher scratched his head and thought for a long time. In the end, he checked the Book of Destiny and remembered the dark trench coat, a skill that he had long forgotten. The only skill that came with the Een soul stigmata was also a passive effect, dark stealth. Staying in a dark corner made it harder to be discovered. The darker it was, the harder it was to be discovered. It had bonuses for stealth and sneak attacks, but he seemed to have been a little too reckless recently. He hadn't used this skill in a long time. You'll know after you advance. Crow smiled mysteriously and didn't say anything else. Instead, he looked at Huaisher's bedside table with interest at the book of steel that had no sense of existence. By the way, you have a new friend. Why don't you introduce him to me? Like an illusion, when Huaisher turned his head, he seemed to see the rare and silent book of steel tremble in Crow's line of sight. No, even the glass of water on the table began to shake. She looked like she was trembling in fear. Huaisher was shocked. He couldn't connect it to the iron-headed young man with the foul mouth who went against Golden Dawn yesterday. Why isn't it talking? Crow turned his head curiously and asked Huaisher, "Is it a little mute?" Then, Beelzebub trembled even harder. But he finally made a sound. "Holy, you're holy." He changed the way he addressed Roland several times, but he didn't dare to finish his sentence. He stuttered and couldn't speak. "Oh, the child is quite polite. Just call me sister." The crow chuckled softly and waved its wings. "All right, hurry up and get some rest. Children are still growing, so they need to sleep more." Don't be idle all day and talk nonsense, understand? Immediately, the Book of Steel stopped moving. It began to play dead. Huaishir started to have a headache. Is there something wrong with this little brother? Did he get heat stroke? After that fierce battle, Huaishir unexpectedly didn't suffer any injuries. He just didn't have enough source substance and needed a rest for a few more days. But Beelzebub's situation wasn't optimistic. As Osiris's shipboard artificial intelligence and core controller, he took on more than 80% of the pressure in place of Huaishir. Now, he was seriously injured. He couldn't stay online all day. He had to sleep for a long time and use Huaishir's source substance to slowly recover. After charging for about 3 hours, he could come online and talk bad for 5 minutes. Fortunately, he could activate his weapon state at any time. The use of the super small judgment armament, a MIT revolver, wasn't affected, although he still needed Beelzebub to come online and control the firepower when he used the Annihilation Origin bullet at maximum power. After wasting 2 on Mirando yesterday, there were 4 left in the magazine, all of which Beelzebub had extracted from Osiris's source substance furnace when they retreated. No matter how small it was still Osiris's weapon configuration and had great destructive power. The only downside was that it consumed too much mana. Osiris could have used it like a machine gun, but with Sophia, a single bullet would have been enough to reduce him to ash, and it would have been too difficult to replenish. Beelzebub had done some calculations. If Huaishir injected most of the source substance into Lord of the Flies every night before he went to sleep without affecting his own condition, excluding the waste and consumption during the process of repairing Lord of the Flies and refining it, he could make one in about 2 months. The upper limit was 6. After all, there were only so many magazines. Fortunately, other than the super high output, he could use alchemy bullets at other times. This way, Huaishir wouldn't die together with the enemy with his little assets. But it was still too expensive. This special caliber and structure bullet was completely handmade by alchemists. The complexity of the alloy was beyond the control of the hand of confinement. Even if Huaishir could buy the finished alloy and reprocess it himself, the cost would still be around 2,000 East Summer dollars per bullet. With a pull of the trigger, all 4 orders were gone. With every shot, the enemy's heart and Huaishir's heart bled together. Okay, stop being so stingy. Crow couldn't stand watching Huaishir calculate on his phone anymore. It raised its wings and patted the back of his head. Since you're fine, get up quickly and do the discharge procedures. Idiot, we're leaving. Where are we going? Huaishir asked instinctively. Then he realized, no, where am I now? Chapter 437. In the Jakarta branch of the Southeast Asian Astronomical Association, Crow rolled her eyes and urged him to get on the road. Don't dawdle. Hurry up and pack your things. I just looked at the map. From here, you can reach Madura in 2 days, then take a boat to Australia. After landing, you'll pass through the Great Rift Valley in the desert, walk in the radiation zone for a week, and follow the bay all the way to Canberra. There, you can change ships, and you'll be able to reach the South Pole. The South Pole? Huaishir was stunned. Why would I go there? I'm not going. He felt that he would not have a good time ahead. Don't talk nonsense, let's go. Crow's words dispelled Huaishir's conflicting thoughts. The birth of life is waiting for you. Huaishir suddenly became suspicious. The birth of life was the only thing he lacked in the 4 foundations. But didn't this thing say that he had to give birth to children? But no matter how he asked, Crow did not reveal anything at all, which made him feel more and more uneasy. And why do we have to walk? Huaishir asked, can I take a plane? This was a branch of the Astronomical Association. With his current authority, he could apply for a plane to fly him there directly. Hey, you're here to travel, not to enjoy. Crow stared at him with her eyes wide open. If you don't use your feet to feel the earth, wouldn't you have come for nothing? At the mention of this, Huaishir could not help but roll his eyes. I've already wasted hundreds of thousands. Who's going to pay me back? Thinking of the 500,000 US dollars he spent on the Stellaris to buy a standing ticket, his heart bled. Crow's eyes suddenly drifted. She was too embarrassed to tell him that the ancient tourism company had already paid for it, along with a large sum of compensation, but she had already taken the money before Huaishir woke up. He was still young. What was the use of so much money? It was better to keep it for herself. When he grew up, she would return it to him. Crow lied to her conscience and said in a trembling voice, "In short, I guarantee that you won't lose anything." Hearing her words, Huaishir's heart calmed down. What else was there to say? This time he was bound to lose. "I'll definitely give it to you for free." The discharge procedure was easy and simple. After all, it was an internal hospital affiliated to the Astronomical Society. After a simple observation, the discharge certificate was issued. After that, Huaishir didn't even leave the room. He directly went down from the medical department on the 6th floor to the administrative department on the 4th floor. After making a registration and some simple inquiries, he was done. The staff members who connected with him expressed their admiration and praise for his mission on Stellaris. After the specific process was completed, the commendation for him would be sent to Jinling. Huaishir was feeling guilty that he had blown up Osiris, so he did not dare to ask any more questions. After realizing that everything was fine, he prepared to leave. After this mission, the higher-ups even gave him half a month's leave. It was almost a month's worth of savings. It was simply too great. When he thought about how old Fu had a pile of documents waiting for him to sign, but he couldn't find him, Huaishir became happier. She also blocked old Fu's phone number. After rejecting the branch's express flight back to Jinling for free, Huaishir picked up his saddlebag and was ready to leave. Half an hour later, a young lady mustered up the courage to open the door of the ward. She only saw an empty bed and a nurse who was cleaning up. "Oh, he's gone," said Yuan Zhao, who was leaning on crutches. He couldn't hold back his laughter. After he finished laughing, he raised his head and found that his cousin was looking straight at him. Then, in the midst of the pain, he noticed that Yuan was also smiling. She raised the Mountain King's sword. Yuan Zhao swallowed his saliva. "Sister Yuan, have mercy, bang." "Okay, what are we going to do next?" Huaishir stood at the entrance of the Astronomical Society's office building. He looked around the lush city of Jakarta and saw people coming and going on the streets. Strictly speaking, this was the first time he had gone abroad in real life. The scenery that greeted him was completely different from that of the eastern summer. The smell and the wind also became unfamiliar. It was as if he had suddenly been thrown into another world, but it was different from the perilous hell and the strange and complicated borders. He was actually at a loss of what to do. He didn't know what to do next. Call a car? He should be looking for a car, but shouldn't he purchase some supplies first? He didn't have much food in his bag, and he should stock up on water. Should he buy some bullets? Come on, you're in the present, okay? Crow sighed on his shoulder. The Astronomical Society is still here. The sky won't fall. You don't have to be so careful. Where did your PTSD come from? Bang! The door of a car in the distance suddenly closed, making a dull sound. Huaishir's hand subconsciously pressed on the saddlebag and touched the hilt of the Sword of Virtue. After Huaishir realized what happened, he awkwardly moved his hand away. He felt like he was Tarzan, out of place in the surrounding environment. Can you relax a little? Crow sighed. Forget it. Listen to my instructions first. Go forward. Turn left. 15 minutes later, Huaishir walked out of the shop wearing a flowery shirt, big pants, sunglasses, and a newly bought backpack. He also held a map in his hand. It was a standard tourist look. It was particularly eye-catching, but at least it was better than his original look of being armed to the teeth. The windbreaker, leather boots, emergency vest, weapons, and so on had been stuffed into the backpack with a saddlebag, but Huaishir always wanted to touch it from time to time, so he adjusted the position so that it could be taken out at any time. After repeatedly confirming that everything was on him, he was a little relieved. He took the map and looked around. Then what? What do I do? Whatever I want to do. Crow tilted his head and looked at him. Isn't traveling like this? Go, have fun, eat something good, be good. Huaishir frowned. It's just a tour? Yes. Crow nodded. Is there really no other trap? Huaishir was doubtful. Someone won't suddenly jump out to kill me, and I won't inexplicably stay in the same car with a cult member, and a bomb won't suddenly fall from the sky while I'm walking. Would you believe me if I said there's really nothing? Crow looked at him, then asked again, if there's really nothing, will you be able to relax? Why sure. After a long silence, Why sure sighed helplessly. I'll try. Okay, then let's make a deal. Crow raised his paw and pressed it on the backpack, directly locking a seal on the zipper, sealing all of Huaisher's equipment. She said seriously, from now on, you can only use the $4,000 in your pocket, unless it's necessary. And I'm talking about the kind of emergency. You're not allowed to use the Ascendant's abilities, weapons, or even the Sacred Mark. How about trying to be an ordinary tourist? I'll try my best. After Huaisher finished speaking, he felt a little guilty. After leaving those things, he felt as if he had been beaten back to his original form. No, it should be said that he seemed to be weaker than before. More panic. He was helpless and at a loss for what to do in this strange world. When he had nothing, he was not afraid of this world, because this world could not take anything away from him except for killing him. But now that his life had finally begun, he began to panic about the malice hidden in the darkness. He did not even know how to be a tourist. In this strange country, he felt confused and had no idea where to start. Can you give me a hint? He looked back at Crow. Life is not easy, Crow sighed. Okay, the last reminder from the easy mode. She said, look at the map and head towards the direction of Canberra. Find a place you're interested in, go sightseeing, travel on foot, eat what the people here eat, drink the water here, sleep in the youth hotels, or under the bridges on the streets in the wilderness. Rely on your appearance to hitch a ride, rely on your strength to play the piano, cheat, and work properly. As long as you head towards the South Pole, everything else is up to you. Pausing for a moment, she said seriously, if you really can't put your heart at ease and want to do something, then go buy a shovel and seeds. Shovel? Huaisher was confused. What for? Planting trees, the old profession of a mountain ghost. Crow raised its wings and rubbed his hair. Learn to enjoy the real life of Ascendant, little devil. You've been out of touch with this world for too long. What kind of suggestion is this? Buy a shovel in Southeast Asia? Plant trees? Isn't this a bit too fantastical? Forget it. At least it's better than being clueless. 10 minutes later, a brand new folding shovel was hanging on Huaisher's backpack. He managed to get it by speaking Latin, Doomsday, and a little bit of Javanese by analogy with the boss. At least it was cheaper by half. Although the boss saw his outfit and looked at him strangely after hearing that he, a tourist, wanted to buy a shovel, he came up with some strange stories. But at least he bought the shovel. He touched his pocket and had a little more than 5,100 US dollars left, which was almost 20,000 Doomsday yuan. If he was frugal with eating and sleeping, he didn't know how much he could save, and he didn't know if this money was enough for him to go all the way to the South Pole. It seemed that the task suddenly became difficult. On the bright side, at least he had saved the distance from Doomsday to Indonesia. Comforting himself like this, he flipped through the introduction in the tourist brochure. After reading it several times, he considered whether to go to an aquarium. Although it was not normal to visit an aquarium here, Huaisher was quite curious. He had never been to that kind of place even once. Crow leaned on his backpack, lazily basking in the sun, and followed him all the way through the streets. In this way, they embarked on the road ahead. It seemed a bit difficult, but at the same time, it was a very real journey. It had nothing to do with saving the world, and it had nothing to do with other people's joys and sorrows. There are no difficult death missions or dangerous situations. Huaisher's first long-distance trip in his life began. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.